decision represents a powerful stand for medical ethics, justice, and human rights, echoing the global call for solidarity with Palestinians.
And recently, we've also seen other national associations, such as the British Medical Association, Turkish. They've released quite strongly worded statements, although none have gone as far as SAMA to cut ties with the Israeli Medical Association, as well as to call for the suspension from the World Medical Association. It's a watershed moment that an organization has actually taken this step. And it's not an idle threat. SAMA is a member of the World Medical Association, and they can action this resolution by bringing it before the World Medical Association.
Dr. Sadiq Mullah, chairperson of Healthcare Workers for Palestine, South Africa.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine.
The sound of Africa is evolving. Experience our new mobile app. Free to download, free to connect.
I'm in my two-piece Jewish. You win that cool, you wish. Busy no good, man bullies. I'm confused, not coolies. Hey, didn't I show you what cool is? Says it for the beans and coolies. You don't want smoke, foolish. Low says in them by Surrey. You got the papa to like I. Zamzam of Vandal. As il patang malam sam. Spaghetti la pesanda. Sissy Kamba. Sit anyak tandas. Ang tandas. Banani tang tandas. Jala Villagas. Zozo Bati Jala Villagas. They say money talks okay. Funu pata shine gane god. Zolo lo bebe la. Betting ya fun. Manje dolo lo nembeza. Nyiza gwaza. I'm on a hot man left. Every night it pass come girl. Twana lana ya set chenzo. 4 7 again. Dance like Kamumpel. Speech like Steve Compel. One piece like Nacho Ren. Cheese, mozzarella. Jala Villagas. Zozo Bati Jala Villagas. They say money talks okay. Fulu pata shine gane god. Jala Villagas. Zozo Bati Jala Villagas. They say money talks okay. Fulu pata shine gane god. Nyaga nyaga. Sweet nom kata kata. Ay, bizo chagalas. Rico talagas. La, sizo takanazi. Simo Calavant, Nina, Nizos Bandaganya, Pigo Nagapapa, with the Olam Bed, Umtabulo is all I chase, Injabul is a put up gate, Angnam Miss, chip on my shoulders of Buga Pants, forward there, in my state, Johan says, oh that's great, Johan says, Hotman level, elevation, I'm Tomang 20, Las Kalagash, Umuna DC, no Tong Seligat, Sabi Arti. Every night it pass come girl. Twana lana ya set chenzo. 4 7 again. Dance like Kamumpel. Speech like Steve Compel. One piece like Nacho Ren. Cheese, mozzarella. Jala Villagas. Zozo Bati Jala Villagas. They say money talks okay. Fulu pata shine gane god. Jala Villagas. Zozo Bati Jala Villagas. They say money talks okay. Fulu pata shine gane god. Jala Villagas. Zozo Bati Jala Villagas. They say money talks okay. Fulu pata shine gane god. Jala Villagas. Zozo Bati Jala Villagas. They say money talks
On
okay.
Open Views Audio Bouquet, Channel 628.
Ilelelele
Hearty laughter and joyous gatherings. Channel Africa celebrates the season with you on the African Perspective.
6 o'clock Central African time. A very good morning to you. This is Rise and Shine, and we are Channel Africa. My name is Asanda Beda.
I'm Peter Ndoro. The news is next. Here's Onel Nsinsi. Good morning.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And a very good morning to our listeners. The Rwandan-backed M23 group has captured hundreds of Burundian soldiers during its latest offensive in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. This as clashes continue despite a warning from the Trump administration. Last week, the M23 entered the strategic town of Uvira near the border with Burundi. That's less than a week after the president of Congo and Rwanda met in Washington with U.S. President Donald Trump and affirmed their commitment to a peace deal known as the Washington Accords. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Saturday said that Rwanda's actions in eastern Congo violated the Washington Accords and vowed to take action to ensure promises made to the president are kept. Rwanda denies supporting the M23 and has blamed the Congolese and Burundian forces for the renewed fighting. South Africa's presidency says it remains firmly committed to supporting efforts to restore peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This follows the recent escalation of violence by the M23 rebel group, which has seized a strategic town of Uvira. Speaking at a media briefing in Pretoria, presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya says diplomatic engagements with the DRC are continuing at various levels.
South Africa, through SADC, as well as the AU, and in support of the United Nations efforts in bringing about peace in the DRC, has been seized with efforts to bring about a peaceful solution to the challenges facing the DRC for close to 30 years. And that is a commitment that remains, firmly so. There is ongoing engagements at various levels, diplomatic levels, between ourselves as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo. So those engagements remain ongoing. Yes, indeed. We are monitoring the situation.
The Belfast Magistrate Court in South Africa's Mpumalanga province has remanded in custody a 43-year-old Zimbabwean national found in possession of hundreds of passports and cash. Edward Taidzi made a brief court appearance following his arrest. Officers found over 580 passports and about $8,000 in cash hidden in his car a week ago. Chataidzi was allegedly on his way to meet someone who would have stamped the passports illegally and the money used as a bribe. The accused is facing charges of fraud, money laundering and contravening the Immigration Act. The case has been postponed to Thursday for a bail application. South Africa's Home Affairs Minister Leon Schreiber says none of the 153 Palestinian travelers that landed at the OR Tambo International Airport last month requested to be granted asylum. Al Jama Al MP Imran Ismail Musa asked Schreiber about his intervention, and he responded in a written parliamentary reply. On the 13th of last month, 153 Palestinians landed in Johannesburg. Only 23 of them had the required documentation and confirmed accommodation as the Immigration Act stipulates. The rest could initially not be processed. Schreiber says he had engaged with the Border Management Authority on admitting the passengers on humanitarian grounds under the care of Gift of the Givers. And lastly, it has emerged that one of the two gunmen who shot dead at least 15 people at a Jewish celebration in Sydney yesterday had been investigated over links to a militant group. The father and son opened fire on hundreds of people, marking the first night of Hanukkah at Bondi Beach, the BBC's Phil Marker reports.
We understand that the father and the son were holding out in a rented house in a suburb in Sydney in preparation for this attack with 6 legally held firearms. The older man was shot dead. His 24-year-old son, he was critically injured and he's in hospital. We know that the father arrived in Australia on a student visa in the late 1990s. We don't know too much more, but we do know that his son was investigated by the authorities in 2019 and was deemed not to be a threat at that time. So I would imagine all of these details will be revisited.
For any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us at +27 11714 4459. Channel Africa News, I'm Oneli Tsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, former Cape Town Spurs coach Sean Bartlett has emphasized discipline for Bafana Bafana players. And Rwanda Parliament volleyball team outclasses Uganda at Inter-Parliamentary Games. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
From Africa's broadcast capital to the furthest corners of the globe, this is Rise and Shine. Every weekday mornings on Channel Africa.
Good morning, and welcome to Rise and Shine. We have so much lined up for you this morning, and one of the things I'm certainly looking for and looking out is the elections in the Central African Republic. President Touadéra, Archange, if you want to know how to pronounce his first name, and it's actually French for archangel. Archange Touadéra. He's trying to get a second term in that country, and we'll get to the bottom of what's happening and what the setup is. And election season is happening. I think their election's on the 28th of December. But today's a special day in South Africa, isn't it, Asanda, Beda?
Yes, it is the 16th of December. It's a reconciliation day that we mark in the country of South Africa. But another story we'll be looking at is that more than 500,000 people have been forced from their homes in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo since the start of December. Fighting intensifying there as far as the M23 rebels are concerned. Last week, the strategic city of Uvira, they claimed that they've taken control over. So we'll be getting more developments in terms of what's happening there. On www.channelafrica.co.za is where you can connect with us on the SABC Plus app via mobile phones. And you can also find us on YouTube. We're live streaming there. At Channel Africa 1 is where we are.
The Upside, taking the African perspective to fresh levels.
From Channel Africa, we're about to have ourselves a good time right now. On Twara.
Come on, brother,
It's a whole thing.
You've partnered up with Focalistic, based on a true story.
You know, it's actually crazy for you to put it like that, partnered up. You know, this is someone I look up to from a very long time. 3 years ago, we put out a single, Pele Pele.
Yeah.
You know, that was my first record with him. This project, based on a true story, the album was so highly anticipated and premeditated on our end, you know, because it's something we constantly, you know, kept on going back and forth about, but we never actioned it. It's actually quite crazy because all of this is happening whilst we are both working on our albums. You know, I'm working on my album 31314 because there's a record, 31314, the interlude. So it's like a prelude to the album, you know.
Let me pronounce it properly. Is it 31314?
31314.
Oh, 31314.
The Upside,
Live and real. It's dynamic.
New day, new stories. Start your morning right with Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
It is indeed time to rise and shine, and every day after the 6 o'clock news, we give you something called the Africa Roundup. And essentially what it is a recap of the top stories and events that took place across the continent and in the diaspora a bit further on, so that you're caught up and that you begin your news day fully informed. And we do this with our team of correspondents and journalists and reporters across the continent making sense of those stories. And let's start today's Africa Roundup with this story. More than 500,000 people have been forced from their homes in the eastern DRC since the start of December. And that's according to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF. The agency says that it's deeply concerned about the sharp rise in fighting between government troops and M23 rebels in the South Kivu province. From Democratic Republic of Congo's capital, Kinshasa, here's Chris Ochamringa.
The M23 rebels recently launched an offensive against government positions that saw them capture the city of Uvira. The UN Children's Agency says the fighting has forced more than 100,000 children and their families to flee to safer areas. UNICEF has called on all warring parties to protect children and respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Clashes between government forces and the M23 rebels have been reported in the city and neighboring areas. The M23 rebels say they are fighting to protect the community of ethnic Tutsis in eastern DRC. The latest round of fighting is a violation of a ceasefire agreement signed last month by the DRC government and the M23 rebels in Qatar and threatens to derail a recently signed U.S.-brokered peace deal.
Uganda is home to more refugees than any other country in Africa, hosting nearly 2 million people fleeing conflict and hunger. Once seen as a progressive model for refugee support, the country is now struggling to cope. At Nakivale settlement, new arrivals are encountering a system pushed to its limits. Michael Baleke reports.
Thousands are arriving, exhausted, hungry, and unsure of what comes next. Many here fled a fresh wave of violence in the eastern DR Congo.
When the rebels attacked our village, we fled to Uganda. Some women were raped, husbands were taken away, and others were killed as they tried to cross the border.
For decades, Uganda welcomed refugees with something rare: freedom of movement, access to land, and the chance to rebuild with dignity. Today that promise is fading. Settlements like Nakivale are full and resources are running out. Uganda still holds its doors open, but it can no longer carry the weight alone. Aid groups warn this could be the end of a model once hailed as a global solution.
The Central African Republic is preparing for an historic quadruple election on the 28th of December. The UN's regional envoy has told the Security Council, Abu Abari, said that the presidential, legislative, regional and municipal polls mark a key step as Bangui, the capital of the CAR, works to strengthen peace and secure its borders with Chad and Cameroon.
It is always a great honor for me to present to you the Secretary General's report on the situation in Central Africa and the activities of the United Nations Regional Office for Central Africa. Over the past 6 months, Central Africa has achieved significant progress, even though the region does continue to face challenges. The situation in the region remains stable overall, yet the electoral processes continue to generate risks, as do the war in Sudan and the insecurity in the Lake Chad Basin, which has generated significant population movements and has been threatening the stability of the states in the region. Central Africa needs the consistent attention of the Security Council. President, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Council, at the end of this year, there will no longer be a political transition underway in Central Africa.
The 18th Swahili Fashion Week, East Africa's largest annual fashion event, has wrapped up in Tanzania's commercial capital, Dar es Salaam, with South African creatives playing a major role behind the scenes. The event brings together designers from across the region and beyond, showcasing new ideas, culture, and emerging trends to the world. Isaac Lukando reports from Dar es Salaam.
Behind the glitz and glamour of the Swahili Fashion Week, there's also a South African touch helping pull the strings. For the last 14 years, Simon Dana's company has worked with Tanzanian organizers to produce the event, helping turn local talent into international moments.
It's really important to put out a very high quality of show because it forms the marketing pillars for a lot of the brands here, and they're really small. This is their once in a year chance to really promote their brand, not only to their local audience, but perhaps get a few extra eyes on it, because the Fashion Week is really a multiplier effect. It brings a lot of media and a lot of followers of fashion who don't necessarily know a lot of the brands, and exposes those small little businesses to a much greater audience.
The Swahili Fashion Week has featured around 58 designers this year from Tanzania, Kenya, Italy, and Trinidad and Tobago, all celebrating a strong Made in Africa identity.
And that's how we come to the end of today's Africa Roundup. We'll have another one for you tomorrow morning after the 6 o'clock news. So, you may have heard yesterday that the G20 presidency of the United States, Donald Trump, have started their meetings already, Sherpa meetings, and South Africa wasn't invited. Find out what South Africa's firm response has been, and that's coming up shortly.
The Midnight Snack, 12 to 3 a.m.
Muranziwa wa mina. Muranziwa means my love in Xitsonga. So if you're listening to this, just know that you are my love. Yes, you and I are in item. We're dating. We are together. So I love you, baby. Why are you blushing? Why are you blushing? Like, haven't you heard somebody confessing their love to you? I mean, you gotta get used to it now, because I'm gonna tell you this every day, that I love you. I can tell you, there's so many people who are never told they are loved. I come to the studio every Monday, 12 to 3, because I've got an appointment with you. I take you serious. Forget about the other person, right? Moranziwa.
The Midnight Snack, every Monday, 12 to 3 a.m. with Chanduko Ligege.
All right, at 16 minutes past 6 Central African time, let's take a moment to zoom into stories making headlines in our East African region of the continent. And as usual, it's on a Tuesday, we're joined by Dennis Beru, who is a journalist and team lead at Grassroots Journalism Kenya. Dennis, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Asanda. I hope you are fine.
Great. Let's start with Tanzania today in our East Africa rep. They marked their Independence Day last week. It was under unusually heavy police presence or security personnel on the streets, we are being told. Can we really say that Tanzania commemorated Independence Day this year? I mean, people were told to stay home.
Yeah, thank you so much, Asanda. And of course, this was very unusual, way for the Tanzanian to commemorate the Independence Day. And remember, activist group had called for demonstration over the economic hardship, restricted political freedom and concerns about governance following the disputed October election. And Asanda, of course, government had warned that the planned demonstration are unlawful and amounts to an attempted coup, urging citizens to remain at home and attend only official commemoration. And of course, the heightened security as a subdued and what is typically a celebratory national occasion. And of course, we saw shattered, streets and since independence, this was the only celebration day where there was no activities. And of course, one of the Tanzanian political activist analyst, Sebado Nyamseda, of course, said that the day remains significant for many citizens as the reminder of the country's liberation struggle. Of course, where he also noted that the current political climate has overshadowed the spirit of the celebration. And of course, Nyamsenda offered a historical context, recalling that although the political independence was achieved in the 1960s, of course, the post-colonial state retained many of the authoritarian and the structure inherited from the former imperial administration. And of course, he even referred to the October 29th crackdown, which drew international criticism, said the event was sad and despicable, adding that many Tanzanians were calling for a national process of reconciliation. And of course, we've seen South African former President Thabo Mbeki's foundation also urged the dialogue. So, Asanda, of course, this is for the very first time we've seen the Tanzanian government panicking, and of course, because they thought the planned demonstration now will happen, and that's why there were heightened security all over Dar es Salaam and other major cities in Tanzania.
Right, and those demonstrations having been called for by activists, what is the reflection from the activists in the country who were calling that the people of Tanzania take to the streets to demonstrate against some of the governance issues they have?
Yes, some of the activists, of course, argued that they needed reforms in the electoral process, and this is after the disputed October 29th election, where we saw so many young people and Tanzanian were killed by the police officers. Of course, these young people had gone to the streets to demonstrate because we saw most of the opposition leaders who were barred from contesting for the October 29th election, and they felt we need electoral reforms in Tanzania because we've been looking at what has been happening in the democratic, spaces, and Tanzania seems not to enjoy any democratic right as far as electoral or election is concerned. And of course, there have been calls that we need reforms, economic readdress, and an inclusive national dialogue. And Tanzania risks deeper instability, rising inequality, joblessness, and growing frustration among young people. He said, of course, they are driving the call for change.
Let's go to Eritrea now, where the country has decided that it wants to quit the East African Regional Bloc, IGAD. There had been tensions between Eritrea and IGAD over the accusation by Eritrea that IGAD is siding with Ethiopia. Is that the main reason for this exit, or is there more to it?
Now, Eritrea has withdrawn from the East Africa Regional Bloc at the IGAD, accusing organization of becoming a tool against countries like it. Eritrea's foreign ministry said IGAD strayed from its founding principles and failed to contribute to regional stability. The decision came amid escalating attention and war of words with neighboring Ethiopia, fueling fear of renewed conflict between the two countries. Eritrea's foreign ministry said IGAD no longer offered any strategic benefit and had forfeited its mandate. And in response, IGAD said that Eritrea had failed to meaningfully engage in meeting or reform efforts since rejoining the bloc that was back in 2023. And the withdrawal followed a long-standing accusation by Asmara that IGAD sided with Ethiopia in regional dispute against a backdrop of dispute over access to Red Sea. And the question around Eritrea's sovereignty and the history of conflict that has repeatedly destabilized the Horn of Africa. And their withdrawal from the IGAD bloc, of course, Asanda, it is a blow to the IGAD as a bloc. Remember, Ethiopia and Eritrea have been having a conflict since time immemorial. And one of the mandates of IGAD was to look at the dispute between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And now their withdrawal, probably we might see meeting being convened by the IGAD to see whether they can address what has been happening between Ethiopia and Asmara. And we've seen the Prime Minister of Ethiopia emphasize that, of course, Ethiopia, they have a right to access the Red Sea. Remember, this is a strategic point for Ethiopia. Remember, Ethiopia is a landlocked country, and for their economic purposes, they have to access the Red Sea through Asmara, which Eritrea has refused, saying that, of course, they can only access Asmara through its, of course, the bilateral collaboration between the two countries.
Let's go to Uganda now. Dennis, the military there has admitted that they are holding a Catholic priest. They're accusing this priest of what they say are violent, subversive activities. He's gone missing since the 3rd of December. Only now we're hearing something about him. But what do these charges even mean? What did he do? What do they mean in simple English?
Yes, Ugandans will be heading to polls in a few weeks, I'll say like that. And the military, they have confirmed that they've been holding the priest who went missing nearly 2 weeks ago, accusing him of involvement in violent and subversive activities. And in a brief statement, the military said Father Deus Dedint Sekabira had been arrested and was in lawful custody and will be charged in court. So the Catholic diocese in the city of Masaka previously said that Father Sekabira was kidnapped by men in Ugandan army uniform, and the church has not responded to the military's accusation of which is now violent subversive activities in regards to the ongoing campaigns towards the election. And Uganda prepares to hold election next month, and of course it faces a growing scrutiny from human rights group over report of enforced disappearance, prolonged detention, and of course without trial. Masaka Diocese raised the alarm about Father Sekabira on Saturday. And in a statement, Masaka Bishop Savarias Jumba said the priest was taken on that December and that his disappearance was a grievous wound inflicted on Masaka Diocese and the entire Catholic Church, and of course, Father Kasabira's family. And on Sunday, hours before military confirmed that they had detained Father Sekabira, the National Police Force, they said they had noted on social media reports of the priest abduction. Remember, in October, two Kenyans activists went missing for 5 weeks after reportedly being abducted by armed men while attending Bobby Wine's campaign. And a few days later, Museveni, now the president, came out saying that they had arrested, describing them as experts in riot who had been put in the fridge for some days. So what we see here, Asanda, is of course the conflicting information from the national police and the military. National police saying that of course they don't know what Sakabira's detention or kidnapping, or where else we see military coming in and saying that of course we have detained the priest.
Dennis, we'll leave it there for today. It's always great having these catch-up sessions with you and your much-needed analysis. Thanks again.
Thank you so much and have a good day.
You too. That's Dennis Beru, journalist and team lead at Grassroots Journalism Kenya. He joins us on Tuesday to give us our East Africa wrap. Some of the stories there, thousands of Congolese fleeing to Burundi as the M23 rebels offensive intensifies. Another story to look out for in the region, Rwanda aiming for F1 race, the last race to be held in Africa, and it was in South Africa in 1993. So those are some of the stories to touch on and look out for in East Africa. Let's get our news headlines. Here's Onel Nsinzi. It's 6:30 Central African time.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. The Rwandan-backed M23 group has captured hundreds of Burundian soldiers during its latest offensive in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. This clashes continue despite a warning from the Trump administration. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa will today deliver a keynote address at the National Commemoration of Reconciliation Day. The Day of Reconciliation is a South African public holiday established in 1995 to foster national unity following apartheid. And the U.S. President Donald Trump says a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia is in sight. Channel Africa News, I am Onel Nsinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Right, it's time to catch you up what's been happening in the world of sport. And, Fikile and I are Man United supporters, and I stayed up last night watching that match. It finished 4-4. It was crazy to watch, but very entertaining. Figule, I wonder if Man United should have won that game, but I know you've got lots of other stories. Good morning to you.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good morning, Peter. They should have. Let me start off with former Bafana player, striker, and Cape Town Spurs coach Sean Bartlett has stressed the importance of maintaining discipline within the South African camp ahead of the AFCON. While not directly commenting on Hugo Bruce's public reprimanding of defender Mbegezeli Mbogazi for his alleged misconduct, Bartlett made it clear that the responsibility ultimately lies with the player. The former striker emphasized that discipline is a minimum requirement for any professional footballer.
I don't mess around. That's the first thing of playing football. If you're late for a training or you're late for a meeting, that's part of discipline. And for me, I've always said it to players, the way you play your football is the way you live your life. And if you're going to be careless off the field, that's going to be we're going to be also in a team environment. So when it comes to discipline and obviously whatever coach's rules are, you've got to respect that. And I think you're individual, but you're part of a team. And you can't have ill discipline before a tournament, a massive tournament for South Africa if we want to win it.
The 1996 AFCON winner advocated for a holistic approach, not just the results.
I will be honest in saying I don't know what exactly he said, but like I mentioned, the discipline part is part of the holistic approach about getting football results. It's not just training and playing, even the mental aspect, the nutrition, everything you want to strength and conditioning all goes hand in hand in order to get results. It's not just the one thing that will get us winning this AFCON in Morocco.
South African Sports Confederation and Olympic Committee SASCOC High Performance Manager Leon Fleischer believes the future of South African sport is in safe hands following Team South Africa's impressive performances at the ongoing African Youth Games in Luanda, Angola. The multi-sport event, which started on the 10th of December and concludes on Saturday, is regarded as a mini African Olympic Games. Team South Africa increased its medals tally to 69 medals by Sunday night at the 4th edition of the Games. Cycling, beach volleyball and table tennis squads departed for South Africa on Monday morning.
These African Youth Games aren't a qualifier for Youth Olympics. There's no qualification for Youth Olympics. They've changed the format. But still very important for us to attend because this is where our young stars are found. You know, Prudence started at the African Youth Games in Algeria, a few of the other, even some of the sevens players. So yeah, it's a very important tournament to start launching the career. It's good for under 16s to be part of a Team South Africa, you know, starting understanding multi-coded events as opposed to just world champs working together.
Let's end with the volleyball. Rwanda's men's parliamentary volleyball team outshone their Ugandan counterparts, securing a 3-1 victory in an entertaining encounter played at Lugogo Indoor Stadium as the 15th Inter-Parliamentary Games drew to a close. Captained by Valens Mohagwa, the chairperson of Rwanda's Public Accounts Committee and a member of Murumarabo County. Team Rwanda set the tone early by taking the opening set 25-21. The games will officially conclude today following a football match between the parliaments of Uganda and Kenya at Philip Omondi Stadium. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fikile Ngwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Well, at Channel Africa 1 is where you can connect with us. That's our social media handle across the different platforms of X, of Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and I think TikTok. Yes, that's where we are. We are on all of them, so we welcome you to get in touch with us. Coming up later in the show, we talk about a festive season being a time that scammers target people and consumers, and we have a response in terms of the alarming figures of scams that happen during this time of the year from the global caller identification platform called Truecaller. They've launched a campaign for awareness to help all of us be on the lookout for those high-risk calls and to avoid festive season fraud. Stay with us on Rise and Shine.
Your life, your rhythm, your Africa. Channel Africa. Find it for free on Google Play and the Apple App Store.
And now let's check in with what's happening in the world of business. We get our news from Chanduko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda, and good morning. Nigeria's headline inflation rate eased for the 8th consecutive month in November, helped by slowing food inflation. Consumer inflation stood at 14.4% year-on-year last month, down from 16.05% in October. This year's inflation slowdown follows years of surging prices that triggered a cost of living crisis. Consumer inflation peaked near 35% last December before falling after the Statistics Office revised its base year and adjusted the weight of items in its price basket. Fortuna Mining says it is seeking mid-tier gold assets while accelerating new projects as it works to restore its 500,000 ounce annual output target after selling mines in Burkina Faso and Mexico. The Canadian miner sold its Yaramoko mine in Burkina Faso and the San Jose operation in Mexico this year, shedding short-life, high-cost assets but also reducing output. It has struck new deals, including a joint venture with De Soto for exploration in Guinea and a bigger stake in Awale Resources, which is a West Africa-focused gold explorer with operations in Ivory Coast, mirroring a global trend as rising gold prices make deal-making more attractive. South Africa's Water and Sanitation Minister, Phemima Jordina, says the Lesotho Highlands Water Project Phase 2 is at an advanced stage. Majordina took to Lesotho amid growing concerns over delays to the multi-million US dollar project, which is expected to significantly boost water supply to South Africa's integrated Vaal River system.
The project, you'll say the completion date is 2028, but you must also take into cognizance that there are certain factors that are not in your control. Hence, we are talking 28, 29.
South Africa's Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities has warned of an increased risk of financial abuse targeting women and persons with disabilities during the festive season. This includes controlling access to money, misusing incomes or social grants, forcing debt in their names or exploiting their economic dependence. The department's spokesperson, Kesha Silala, has called for vigilance during this time.
During the festive season, many perpetrators may intensify these tactics, leaving women and persons with disabilities financially trapped. The department urges women and persons with disabilities to remain vigilant and emphasizes that economic abuse is recognized as a form of domestic violence under South African law.
The pound held steady ahead of a string of UK data that could help cement expectations for a Bank of England rate cut later in the week. Markets show traders are almost fully pricing in a rate cut on Thursday when the bank meets, and traders expect another cut by the middle of 2026 with a possibility of a second by year end. Inflation is still running at nearly twice the BOE's 2% target rate, but the economy is slowing. Now let's have a look at financial indicators. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira, 451, Botswana 13 pula 51, Kenya 128 shilling 40, Zambia 23 kwacha 01. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 42, in Russia 80 rubles 2, India 90 rupee 53, China 71.05, South Africa 16 rand 87 cents. $1 is at 75 pence to the British pound and 85 to the euro. Commodities, gold is at 4,344, platinum at $1,744, platinum at and the price of Brent crude oil at $61.39 a barrel. That is all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Right, coming up shortly, I'm going to be having an interesting conversation about internet scams. And they're getting scarier and scarier in terms of how convincing they are. And because of COVID, I think we've trusted the internet and internet transactions much, much more than ever before. And in particular in South Africa, this year we believe that the scams that people are experiencing and will see are the worst they've been in over 5 years. And we're going to find out why and some of the things that you need to look out for. And whilst it may appear to be a South African story, believe me, it is a continent-wide problem. So that's coming up shortly, and we'll be talking to the Global Head of Corporate Communications at Truecaller.
The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
There's a Ugandan lawmaker. His name is Atkins Katusabe, who speaks with an American accent in Parliament. So the parliamentarians have complained that we don't understand what you are saying.
Listen to him. Mr. Speaker, I think this is a disaster that could cause an extinction of an entire community. Going to procedure.
Mr. Speaker, the English that is trying to put this matter here is confusing a number of us and making us miss very serious issue. He needs to speak the common English of Uganda. The English is too much.
Need a piece of paper so that we'll be able to read. The English is too much. I picture him saying order, order, out of order.
Saturday and Sunday mornings belong to the Morning Switch. 3 to 6 a.m. Central African Time.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9. Central African Time on Channel Africa.
South Africa's presidency has taken a firm stance following its exclusion from the first G20 Sherpas meeting under the United States leadership, insisting that as a founding member of the bloc, it does not require an invitation to participate. The U.S. is hosting the two-day meeting this week after assuming the G20 presidency from South Africa last November. A transition, Pretoria says, should not dismiss its standing or influence. Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe has more at just about 6:45 Central African Time.
South Africa has pushed back strongly against what it describes as its exclusion from the first G20 Sherpas meeting under the United States presidency, insisting it requires no invitation as a founding member of the forum. Speaking at a media briefing, presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya says the U.S. move undermines multilateralism and must be challenged. The U.S. convenes its first Sherpas meeting without South Africa's participation.
What are we doing in South Africa with respect to the so-called exclusion from the G20? One, we have strongly asserted that we don't need to be invited to G20 meetings. We are a full member of the G20. We are a founding member of the G20. Secondly, what the U.S. is seeking to do is an affront to multilateralism, and it must be challenged and it must be rejected by all members of the G20. We've made that point quite clearly.
Magwenya says South Africa has engaged other G20 members who have voiced support for Pretoria and rejected the US's unilateral decision.
We have been engaging all other members of the G20 on this matter. We have encouraged members to express quite strongly their own views as they've expressed to us their support as well as their rejection of the US's position and decision in this regard, which was taken unilaterally in a body that takes decision through consensus.
Magwenya stressed that South Africa will not advocate for any boycott of the US-led G20 processes, despite its objections to the manner in which the first Sherpas meeting has been handled. He said Pretoria remains committed to multilateral engagement and will instead focus on ensuring that key priorities raised during the Johannesburg summit continue to receive sustained attention within the G20, beyond the tenure of any single presidency.
We are not going to do, which is not going to be helpful. We're not going to ask countries to boycott G20 meetings and G20 processes. We were against the US boycott. We will not promote any form of boycott. However, we will continue to advocate for the ongoing championing of the issues that were strongly surfaced during the Johannesburg summit, so that those issues remain firmly on the G20 agenda. Whether the US approves of those issues or not, those are issues that are important not only to us as a country and as a continent, but to the rest of the world. Issues of inequality, issues of how we deal with poverty, climate change, how to ensure climate justice, and so on. Those are issues that cannot be confined to just a single year presidency. Those are issues that need to be taken forward and engaged upon on an ongoing basis.
He added that the matter has also been formally raised with leaders of the G7 for their attention.
We are also in close discussion with G7 members to ensure that there is a breach, a continuity breach substantively of the issues that were surfaced and dealt with at the Johannesburg summit into the G7 agenda as well. And some of those G7 member countries are also G20 member countries. And so that's what we are doing.
Michael Mbewe, Channel Africa News, Johannesburg.
Wake up to the essence of the continent. Rise and shine on Channel Africa.
So the festive season in South Africa is shaping to be one of the country's most dangerous periods in terms of scams in at least 5 years. New data shows that more than 2/3 of South Africans have been targeted by scammers this year, with fraud incidents rising sharply as people shop, travel and send money over the holidays. Now, criminals are increasingly using phone calls, SMSs and impersonation tactics to trick victims into handing over personal and banking details. In response, the global caller identification platform Truecaller has launched a nationwide awareness campaign to help people spot high-risk calls and avoid festive season fraud. Well, to unpack what's driving this surge and how consumers can protect themselves, we're now joined by Hitesh Bhagat, who's Global Head of Corporate Communications at Truecaller. Hitesh, thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So, Hitesh, South Africa is being flagged as facing its highest festive season scam risk in 5 years. From what you're seeing at Truecaller, what's driving this sharp increase in scam activity right now?
Well, South Africa in general, like many other countries, has a high mobile usage and growth. It has a very fast growing digital economy and an ever increasing amount of e-commerce activity. So all of these factors lead to an increase in spam and scam activity as well. I'd also like to briefly touch upon the difference between spam and scam, and I think it's important for your listeners to understand this. While spam is more of a nuisance, it could be telemarketing calls and such, people trying to sell you things or insurance and credit cards and so on. But scams are malicious. And this is where you really need to have your guard up because they're trying to steal your money, they're trying to gain access to your device, to your bank accounts, and so on. So you need to keep your guard up in these cases.
Are there more scammers and more scams, or what's happening? Because a lot of people are saying they're just getting more and more calls than ever before.
Yeah, exactly, Peter. I think you touched upon this briefly about impersonation, and I think that impersonation type scams, they're always common. It's not just SA. It's a global issue, and there could be bad actors impersonating banks, the police, telecom providers, utilities, essentially well-known names. In SA, it could even be ICASA. So when you impersonate someone, you're trying to get somebody to let their guard down and then hand over information. So that's tech support scams are also a part of impersonation scams. And then when you are around the festive and holiday season like we are now, there's always a surge in delivery and courier type scams. People are expecting packages, holiday rental, hotel offers. There's fake competitions around free gifts. People get enticed by messages, things like that. And in SA, even Stockfell or savings group scams can be quite common around this time.
Yeah, and some of these scams are quite clever because at first glance, you won't realize that this doesn't look quite right. Yesterday, I got a message saying, please click through TrueFinds SA /ZA. The proper site is .co.za, and it talks about traffic fines. But what they didn't realize is I don't have a car at the moment. So, but other people might have seen this and they wouldn't have seen that it's not .za, it's /ZA. Are these the kind of clever tricks that are being employed?
So if you go back to the time when we had email scams,
Yeah.
they would often include a link, and that link is trying to get you to click on that. They're trying to get you to click on that link, and they're trying to make it seem legitimate. There's often, phishing type scams that we've seen. Now, also you could ask why this season, right? And it's there in many countries where Truecaller operates, and we see this. Scammers like to exploit any chances that they get. It could be a festive season, it could be changes in regulations, it could be events, it could even be a pandemic. They did exploit that as well, right? They don't leave any stone unturned. And folks, people who might let their guard down, they could be your parents, or they could be grandparents, people who are not so tech savvy, and people who conduct a lot of business on their phone, or they might be in a hurry. You could end up falling victim to one of these types of scams.
And I suppose over the festive season, we do let our guard down because we're concentrating on relaxing. And that's when we need to be most alert.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much around. It's also hard for us to keep track of. Now, Truecaller is essentially is community powered, and that's how we know what's happening in different countries. Like we kind of get to hear that directly from the consumers of Truecaller.
Beyond the typical sort of trying to get bank details and fake bank calls, what other big scams are you particularly concerned about at the moment that you're seeing an increase in?
Well, and this is spam and scam is a global issue, right? I had mentioned this earlier, and there's a bunch of scams that might be native to different regions. I think we spoke about briefly in SA, the kind of stuff that goes on, and it's always the same tactics that scammers will try to employ. One of the things that we are seeing is calls that may come in not from your regular telecom provider, right? They might use third-party apps to get in touch with you. There may be links that you get over SMS. And I think the basic rule there is that you should treat every unknown call or message that you receive as suspicious. And once you have that basic rule down, you're automatically going to be a lot more protected. Anything unknown is suspicious, and then we move on from there and try and figure out who and what to trust.
I guess particularly the banks now, they'll never ask you for banking information, right? I mean, they'll refer you to your app, and the app is one that you trust and have used before. If they ask anything beyond that, that's usually a warning sign.
You're absolutely right, Peter. The scammer will always try to trap you with a sense of urgency. They want to make you do something without thinking about it too much, or asking anyone about it. So when you see this, that hey, somebody's trying to get me to do something in an urgency, that's a big red flag, and you should not trust that. And you're right, your banks and service providers are not going to call you or message you and ask for information or get you to click on links and such. So that is one way that you can definitely protect yourself. Never click links, download any apps that anyone sends you, because even apps, they can impersonate other things, try and get access to your device. If they get access to your messaging inbox, for instance, they can easily get access to other services that you use, bank accounts, things like that. So the basic rule is never give out any information, especially to an unknown phone call. And of course, being from Truecaller, I would like to say this, that this is what we've been doing for 15 years now. Truecaller is in the business of protecting people from scam and spam. So if you can download the app from the Play Store or the App Store. And the thing about Truecaller is it's not just protecting you from the unknown calls that come through the telecom networks, right? It can also identify calls on third-party messaging apps like WhatsApp, for instance. And there's a lot we see that scammers will try to use WhatsApp as well and bypass any regulations or systems that are there in place in each country.
Wow. Okay. And very briefly, finally, if someone realizes that they've already fallen victim to a scam, what can they do immediately to try and limit the damage?
Well, I mean, that really depends on what kind of scam it is. But obviously, if there is any details that you have given out or information like bank account or credit cards, you need to sort of block all of those immediately, and then you need to report it to the local authorities as soon as possible. So each country will have their own systems in place. So you need to be able to do that. And you can also double check, like folks who are not, let's say, on Truecaller, you could go to the Truecaller website or download the app. You can put in phone numbers there and search, what that phone number is. You can get, because of the community that Truecaller uses, it's not just a name that you get a lot of context and insights into that number. Like people can comment on that number as well, right? We use colors to identify calls. So a blue call is
Hitesh,
just a regular.
unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I think you've given us a good heads up. There's technology available to assist us. But thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was Hitesh Bhagat from Truecaller.
Stay tuned to Channel Africa. Stream us on our new and updated website, channelafrica.co.za.
We now enter the second hour of Rise and Shine. This is Channel Africa. I'm Asanda Beda. Good morning if you've just joined us. Here's your news with Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Congolese ex-rebel leader Roger Lumbala has been found guilty by a Paris court of complicity in crimes against humanity, which were committed during the Second Congo War, and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The trial has been held by international justice advocates as a milestone in expanding accountability for the conflict that left millions dead. Prosecutors have sought a life sentence for the 67-year-old Lumbala. The allegations concern a military operation known as Erasing the Board, which was carried out in 2002 and 2003 in northeastern Congo and was led at the time by Lumbala. The M23 group has captured hundreds of Burundian soldiers during its latest offensive in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. This as clashes continued despite a warning from the Trump administration. Last week, the M23 entered the strategic town of Uvira near the border with Burundi. That's less than a week after the president of Congo and Rwanda met in Washington with U.S. President Donald Trump and affirmed their commitment to a peace deal known as the Washington Accords. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Saturday said that Rwanda's actions in Eastern Congo violated the Washington Accords and vowed to take action to ensure promises made to the president are kept. Rwanda denies supporting the M23 and has blamed Congolese and Burundian forces for the renewed fighting. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa will today deliver a keynote address at the National Commemoration of Reconciliation Day at the Ngome Museum in Umzinyathi district in the KwaZulu-Natal province. Day of Reconciliation is a South African public holiday established in 1995 to foster national unity following apartheid. The date was chosen because it held significance for both the Afrikaner and African liberation history. It marks the Afrikaner Day of the Vow and the founding of the ANC armed wing, Umkhonto weSizwe Party. The holiday serves to acknowledge this shared through conflicting past and promote reconciliation and forgiveness. South Africa's Home Affairs Minister Dr. Leon Schreiber says none of the 153 Palestinian travelers that landed at the OR Tambo International Airport last month requested asylum in the country. Al Jama'al MP Imran Ismail Musa asked Schreiber about his intervention, and he responded in a written parliamentary reply. On the 13th of last month, 153 Palestinians landed in Johannesburg. Only 23 of them had the required documentation and confirmed accommodation as the Immigration Act stipulates. The rest could initially not be processed. Schreiber says he had engaged with the Border Management Authority on admitting the passengers on humanitarian grounds under the care of Gift of the Givers. And lastly, the U.S. President Donald Trump says a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia is in sight. This follows talks between Ukraine, European leaders and U.S. negotiators. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says the possibility of a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is conceivable for the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion. U.S. officials have indicated that Washington could offer Ukraine sustainable security guarantees. Trump has expressed his views.
We had a very good conversation with the European leaders, many of them involving the war with Russia and Ukraine. We had a long discussion, and things are seemingly going well, but we've been saying that for a long time, and it's a difficult one.
For any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us at +27 11 714 4459. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Tsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, Nigeria Football Federation president denies meddling in Super Eagles AFCON squad selection. And Namibia came 24th at the Junior Women's Hockey World Cup. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Wherever the hour finds you, across the world, here's your morning African lens on the world's leading story. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa, the African Perspective.
Live from our Johannesburg studios is where we are joining you. This is Channel Africa. The show is called Rise and Shine. If you've just joined us, good morning. Thank you for doing just that. I'm Asanda Beda. One of the stories we're looking at in this hour is electioneering or election campaigning, which has officially started in the Central African Republic ahead of the presidential vote, that vote being scheduled for the 28th of December.
And I'm Peter Ndoro. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in. Rise and Shine, the best way to start your day. So what am I looking at in the next half an hour? I am going to be going to the DRC, and instead of peace coming after that agreement that was signed in Washington, things are escalating, and we're hearing that the M23 claim that they have captured Burundian soldiers. What does this all mean? We'll unpack that in this next half hour.
Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you'll be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African Perspective. Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
So election campaigning has officially begun in the Central African Republic ahead of the presidential vote scheduled for December 28th. Incumbent President Faustin Archange Touadera is seeking a second term. presenting himself as a guarantor of stability, while the opposition is promising economic recovery and stronger institutions. The campaign is unfolding amid concerns over security and political tensions. To discuss the start of the campaign and what's at stake, we're joined by Charles Buzel, who is senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, specializing in Central Africa. Charles, good morning to you, and thanks for making time to talk to us.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, electioneering having kicked off in the Central African Republic, what are you hoping this time period and this specific electioneering campaign time is going to reflect in terms of the politics of the CAR?
Well, we could say that those elections are, in some respects, a landmark election. Why? Because first, the presidential and legislative polls are the first since the adoption in 2023 of a new constitution that allocated more power to the presidency and abolished presidential term limits. As for the municipal election and the regional election, they have not been held since decades and never for the regional election because of a budgetary reason. So in those regards, these elections are special.
President Touadera is campaigning on a message of peace and stability. How powerful is that message for voters, especially for a country that has experienced years of conflict?
Well, this is actually a strong message, and maybe one of the main area where the President Touadera had some success. We saw that the security situation improved since 2021. From that date, the Central African Republic and its partner, which are the UN peacekeeping mission, but also Russian paramilitary of Wagner and Rwandan military, have take back the control of the main city in the country. And so since then, we have seen the state authority redeploying and some more armed groups lay down their weapon to rejoin the peace agreement. So yes, I think Touadera will use the security situation improvement as one of his main legacy. Maybe we can also say that this president is the favorite in a context of shrinking democratic space and maybe doubts about the credibility of the votes, which make him the main favorite for this election.
On the other hand, the opposition is focusing more on rebuilding the state and reviving the economy. Does the opposition offer a real tangible difference? Is it a real alternative for voters, or does stability still trump everything else up?
Well, there is some problem with the opposition. Maybe the main one is that the opposition is not inclusive, because a significant part of the opposition have decided to boycott the election because they deem that these elections are not credible and they don't recognize the legitimacy of the new constitution of 2023. And so we have most of the opposition boycotting the election. It will affect the debates because those political parties of the opposition, they will not be able to deploy their view. They will not have access to public speech, and so it will create a lack of inclusivity in this political election.
And what, in terms of the significance of those defections within opposition parties, what will, or how significant are these defections in an election like this? As you mentioned, there are some political shifts within opposition parties.
Well, we have some of the most prominent political opponents, such as Martin Zigele or Mboli Gumba, who will boycott the election, and so those political opponents have a consistent support base that will not be able to to see their ID reflected in the political speech because those parties are boycotting, and so they will be wiped out of the political landscape for the next years. And so, yes, it's creating maybe a problem of representativity for some citizens.
The United Nations has lent its voice to this. They've raised concerns about security risks and political polarization during the campaigning period. How serious are these risks as we move closer to 28 December?
Well, I think we can say that those risks are way less high than for the last election. As a reminder, the last election in 2020 was heavily disrupted by a rebel coalition, which later attacked the capital, Bangui. Today, we are not in this scenario. The armed groups have never been as weak as today. And so we think that the election will be able to take place in most of the country, at least on the security side, even if there are some local pocket of insecurity which remain in the country. We can maybe mention the two main ones, the Vakaga region, which is bordering Sudan, and the Ombomu region, which is bordering DRC and South Sudan. Those two regions are still hosting some active rebel groups which have been attacking the government forces over the last months. And so it's very likely that those militia may attack the state representative or may do kidnap for ransom of civil servants during the election. So we can expect some local disruption because of the security situation, but we expect that in most of the country, the security will allow this election to take place without incident. There is also another issue which could deprive some citizens from their votes, which is funding issues. We are seeing that actually the body in charge of organizing the election is struggling with finance problem, and so is struggling to bring the voting material in some remote area. And so we could expect that some remote area will be maybe deprived of voting.
Earlier, when the incumbent president, Touadera, addressed some supporters, thousands of supporters, that was over the past weekend, he was met by an enthusiastic crowd. Does that reflect the enthusiasm of the people of the Central African Republic in terms of the faith they have still in the incumbent?
Well, without any doubt, maybe in the capital, Bangui, some people may have benefited of this long period of peace, at least for the capital, Bangui, which have not known a big episode of violence since a few years, and it has allowed some businessmen to enrich themselves. But we should also say that during this political meeting, very often a lot of money is distributed to the people to make them come. And this was the case during the meeting you're mentioning. So it's difficult to assess the authenticity of the people fervor.
Looking at the 28 December elections, what will the key indicators for you be in terms of whether this election is likely to be a peaceful and a credible one, not just for the people of the Central African Republic, but the region and the international observers?
I would say there is two main indicators that would show that. The first one is if the campaigns take place in a peaceful atmosphere, and meaning that first armed groups don't disrupt the campaign nor the election, but also the authority in Bangui allow the opposition to run their campaign freely. And the second indicator would be that the result, which would be announced next year, are not disputed between the candidates, and that most of the candidates acknowledge the legitimacy of the results, and I hope it will happen like that.
Any word from the Electoral Commission in terms of their preparedness and their readiness for 28 December, and if that's convincing?
Well, this is maybe the most worrying point of those elections, is that we are seeing a lack of preparation from the body organizing the election, or at least a problem of finance. And so they are actually struggling to distribute the voter cards. And they are even exploring some alternative in case they will not be able to distribute them. We are starting to hear that they may accept the voter cards of last election 5 years ago, or even just your identity card. But yeah, there is a challenge on this issue, and it may, as I said before, deprive some citizens from their votes in some remote area.
Charles, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Again, we're going to leave it there for now.
Thank you very much.
Charles Buezel is a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, specializing in Central Africa, giving us his analysis of the upcoming elections on the 28th of December in the Central African Republic. Electioneering having officially kicked off, and all the promises being made from the incumbent president to opposition figures.
Got something to say? Are you passionate about issues that matter?
Do you have a voice that deserves to be heard?
Well, we've got the perfect platform for you. Call in or drop us a WhatsApp on +27 63 406 9126.
And we will call you back.
So you could have your say and be part of the conversation.
30 years of age. I just turned 30 on the 15th of November. So yeah, that's who I am, you know.
It's not just talk. It's your chance to air your views.
Share your opinion.
Engage with a community that values your perspective.
Follow us on our social media.
Visit our website at www.channelafrica.co.za
and get ready to share your views
on Channel Africa,
the African perspective.
Unwinding with Africa's holiday rhythms. Rejoice with Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Right, let's go to the DRC, where in the east of the country, fighting is escalating again, with the Rwanda-backed M23 rebel group claiming that it's captured hundreds of Burundian soldiers during the latest offensive. Now, the rebels last week entered the strategic town of Uvira, close to the Burundi border, despite renewed diplomatic efforts led by the United States under the Washington Accords. Now, the developments are raising fresh concerns about regional escalation in the Great Lakes region. And to discuss, we're now joined by Dr. Frederick Goluba, who's a political analyst specializing in the Great Lakes region. So good to talk to you again. It's been a while. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Peter. Good to talk to you again. It's been a while indeed.
So, M23, they claim that they've captured hundreds of Burundian soldiers. From your reading of the conflict, what does this tell us about the balance of forces in the east of the DRC right now?
Well, clearly the balance of forces is in the favor of M23 because, as you would have seen, their advance from the areas where they were occupying to Uvira would have covered hundreds of kilometers and several towns and villages. And for the most part, it seemed to me, observing from the Great Lakes region, that the coalition forces, or what we call the coalition, the Congo coalition, which comprises the armed forces of the government of Congo, the armed forces of Burundi, the militia that borders the Rwandans, the FDLR, there was Alendo, which is a collection of various Congolese militias, were pretty much fleeing in advance of the arrival of M23. So this particular offensive, as the one that took down Goma and Bukavu, really seems to be characterized by pretty much more fleeing of the other forces than them standing to fight. So I would say that the balance of forces is really decisively in favor of M23.
Why is the M23 seemingly undefeatable at the moment? Who is giving them strength? Because clearly they're getting support, getting arms, and it seems to be an endless supply at this time.
I think there is one factor that commentators and analysts disregard, which is that the government of the DRC is very good at purchasing arms. And they do it, they purchase loads and loads of arms from China, from other sources. After the fall of Goma, we saw stockpiles of really, really very, very sophisticated arms. I was made to understand that after they took Goma, M23 shipped out 12 trucks of arms. Now, in the same way, when they captured Bukavu, they captured more arms. So it doesn't seem to me as if M23 is necessarily primarily supplied from outside the DRC. They are capturing a lot of arms from the DRC. We have seen the photos, we have seen the videos, and we also witnessed physically the arms that had been stockpiled in Goma. Now, that doesn't mean that that's their only source. There may be other sources, but I really get surprised when people present this as some kind of mystery. It's not a mystery at all. The government of the DRC indirectly supplies M23 lots and lots of arms, which they capture as the DRC forces and their allies flee from whichever areas they might have been in that M23 captures. And this was also quite evident in 2012 and 2013. So this story hasn't changed.
Let's talk about Burundi a little bit more. Burundi has kept its troops inside eastern Congo for several years as part of a regional security effort. Has this deployment now become a liability for Bujumbura?
It would have become a liability only in the sense that a lot of Burundian troops have been killed in the DRC. Others have been captured. In a sense, one could even say that Burundi, as a sovereign state, has really literally been humiliated by this rebel group M23. Now, inside Burundi, from what we pick up, people are quite puzzled by why Burundi is sending troops into the DRC. The Burundians I speak to tend to say that they really don't see what their stake in the DRC is. There are rumors that this is simply on the basis of friendship between the two heads of state. But yes, Burundi has had many troops in the DRC. The last reports I had claimed that up to 20,000 Burundian troops have been deployed in the DRC, but we haven't really seen them make much of a difference on the ground when it comes to combating M23. The reports that we get always suggest that they seem to have been involved in committing atrocities, at least in the Ruzizi plain or around Uvira and the Minembwe Hills, against the Congolese, Kinyarwanda-speaking Tutsis that are commonly known as Banyamulenge. And that's the basis on which M23 seems to have made a decision to now move decisively and capture those areas where Burundian troops, Congolese troops, and Wazalendo and FDLR have been accused of committing atrocities, burning villages, killing cattle, and literally besieging the Banyamulenge communities within very small areas and literally starving them.
Try and make sense for us and help us understand. Accords were signed in Washington, D.C. between President Tshisekedi and President Kagame.
Yes.
M23 escalate their fighting and their violence. The United States says to Kigali, you are violating the accords that were signed. Help me understand how all of these are connected.
Now, first of all, as far as I know, before the signing of the Washington Accords, and actually during the very time that they were being signed, fighting had already broken out in that area. It's not that the fighting started as soon as the Accords had been signed. Now, the other thing that we also need to take note of is that the Washington Accords were between the government of the DRC and the government of Rwanda. Those accords did not involve M23. Now, there is another negotiation process that is happening in Doha, in Qatar, and that's the one that is directly involving the government of the DRC and M23. So there are two tracks, because between the government of the DRC and the government of Rwanda, the problem is FDLR, the militia that the Rwandans accuse of comprising members who planned and executed the genocide, at least to a significant degree. Some of them are much younger, so they wouldn't have been taking part in that genocide. But that force, the Rwandans say, is a threat to their security. Now, the negotiations between the DRC government and Rwanda were around that force, the threat it poses to Rwanda, and what needs to be done to neutralize it, and therefore to enable the Rwandans to change what they call their security posture in the DRC. Now, that did not include M23 directly. So the negotiations between M23 and the government of DRC are going on in Doha, and those are advancing fairly slowly. But as they take place, the fighting on the ground continues sporadically, or it has been continuing sporadically, where the government of the DRC forces bombard M23 positions in collaboration with the Burundians and these other militias. So that's what triggered the fighting. The ongoing skirmishes that were happening under the radar, because the media were not reporting these skirmishes. It only became visible after M23 decisively decided that they were going to go all the way to Uvira and capture those areas where they accuse the DRC forces and Burundian forces of harassing and killing and murdering the Rwandophone community in those areas and causing general mayhem, which is also not quite clearly reported by the media in the way that we understand it from this side.
All right. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Dr. Goluba Mutebi, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and thanks so much indeed for your insights.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Have a good day.
Thank you. That was Dr. Frederick Goluba Mutebi, who's a political analyst and a Great Lakes specialist, giving us his take on the M23's advance to Burundi. All right, 7:30. Here's your headlines with Onele Nsinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Congolese ex-rebel leader Roger Lumbala has been found guilty by a Paris court on complicity in crimes against humanity committed during the Second Congo War and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The Global Refugee Forum Progress Review, co-hosted by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN Refugees Agency, and Switzerland, has gotten underway in Geneva. And US President Donald Trump has filed a defamation suit against the BBC. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nsinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
And now we find out what's happening in the world of sports. And here's Fikile Lingwati to let us know.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
We kick off with football news. Nigeria Football Federation, NFF President Ibrahim Gusau has publicly dismissed claims that the federation influenced head coach Eric Chele's final squad selection for the upcoming Africa Cup of Nations. Chele recently narrowed his provisional 54-man list down to 28 players, a decision that sparked criticism and accusations that high-ranking NFF officials had pushed for the inclusion of certain individuals. In an interview, Gusau cautioned against such rumors. Gusau urged the public to be wary of unfounded allegations, particularly those circulating on social media, and reaffirmed his commitment to allowing the coaching staff independence in sporting decision. Former Cape Town Spurs coach Sean Bartlett has stressed the importance of maintaining discipline within the South African camp ahead of the AFCON. While not directly commenting on Hugo Bruce's public reprimanding of defender Mbegezeli Mbogazi for his alleged misconduct, Bartlett made it clear that the responsibility ultimately lies with the player. The former striker emphasized that discipline is a minimum requirement for any professional footballer.
I don't mess around. That's the first thing of playing football. If you're late for a training or you're late for a meeting, that's part of discipline. And for me, I've always said it to players, the way you play your football is the way you live your life. And if you're going to be careless off the field, that's going to be we're going to be also in the team environment. So when it comes to discipline and obviously whatever coach's rules are, you've got to respect that. And I think you're individual, but you're part of a team. And you can't have ill discipline before a tournament, a massive tournament for South Africa if we want to win it.
The 1996 AFCON winner advocated for a holistic approach, not just the results.
I will be honest in saying I don't know what exactly he said, but like I mentioned, the discipline part is part of the holistic approach about getting football results. It's not just training and playing, even the mental aspect, the nutrition, everything you want to strength and conditioning all goes hand in hand in order to get results. It's not just the one thing that will get us winning this AFCON in Morocco.
On to volleyball news, Rwanda's men's parliamentary volleyball team outshone their Ugandan counterparts, securing a 3-1 victory in an entertaining encounter played at Lugogo Indoor Stadium as the 15th Inter-Parliamentary Games drew to a close. Captained by Valence Muhagwa, the chairperson of Rwanda's Public Accounts Committee and a member of the Murumunawabo County, Team Rwanda set the tone early by taking the opening set 25-21. The two-week tournament brought together members of parliament from 6 teams representing Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and the East African Legislative Assembly. The games will officially conclude today following a football match between the parliaments of Uganda and Kenya at Philip Omondi Stadium. We end with boxing news. Anthony Joshua says his career needed a reset as he prepares for a surprise showdown with YouTube star Jake Paul in Miami this weekend. Joshua has not fought since suffering a knockout defeat to Daniel Dubois in September 2024 and was linked with several big-name opponents before agreeing to face Paul. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fikile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
All right. What can I tell you? Today is actually a fascinating day. It is the Day of Reconciliation in South Africa, but there's quite a bit of history to this. So in 1838, an event took place in South Africa, which is known by different things, different names because of the different groups that were fighting. So the Battle of Blood River. On December 16, 1838, a decisive battle took place near Ncome River, later renamed Blood River in KwaZulu-Natal, between approximately 470 armed Voortrekkers, Afrikaner settlers, and a large Zulu army, and it was estimated to be between 10,000 and 20,000 men. So, out in the just before the battle, the Voortrekkers themselves vowed that if they won, they would dedicate this day to God for generations. After that, the Afrikaners celebrated this as the Day of the Vow, the Day of the Covenant, whilst the Zulu people called it Dingan's Day. And so there were these two views for history for a long time. Black Zulus calling it Dingani's Day and the Afrikaners calling it the Day of the Vow. 1994 came and the apartheid disappeared, and the government said, look, we have to unify our people. Instead of having this division over this day, let's call it something else. And now it's known as the Day of Reconciliation. And that's the history.
Be inspired. Stay informed. Channel Africa, the beauty of life. Now available anytime, anywhere with our new app.
It's time to catch you up now with the world of business, and at the desk this morning, Chanduko Ligege. Good morning.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Good morning, Peter, and thank you. Uganda is planning to borrow $608 million from lenders such as the Korea Export-Import Bank and South Africa's Rand Merchant Bank, RMB, to finance infrastructure development. The country's ballooning public debt has triggered concern among opposition politicians, analysts, and the central bank, which has warned that high debt servicing costs are diverting resources from essential social services. A document from the Ugandan Parliament shows that of the total credit, the country plans to source $448 million from RMB and the rest from Korea Export-Import Bank. Data from LSEG and DBX Commodities show that South African miners are boosting thermal coal exports to Israel after top supplier Colombia ordered a total ban on shipments of the power generation fuel to Israel. Colombia and South Africa are among Israel's critics, with the South American nation's presidential decree enacting the export ban after accusing Israel of killing tens of thousands in Gaza, including children. South Africa has accused Israel of genocide at the International Court of Justice. Colombian coal exports to Israel dropped to zero in the 3 months ended November after Colombia doubled down on an earlier ban and blocked supplies under long-term deals. South Africa's Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities has warned of an increased risk of financial abuse targeting women and persons with disabilities during the festive season. This includes controlling access to money, misusing incomes or social grants, forcing debt in their names, or exploiting their economic dependence. The department's spokesperson, Keisha Silala, has called for vigilance during this time.
During the festive season, many perpetrators may intensify these tactics, leaving women and persons with disabilities financially trapped. The department urges women and persons with disabilities to remain vigilant and emphasizes that economic abuse is recognized as a form of domestic violence under South African law.
Nigeria's headline inflation rate eased for the 8th consecutive month in November, helped by slowing food inflation. Consumer inflation stood at 14.45% year-on-year last month, down from 16.05% in October. This year's inflation slowdown follows years of surging prices that triggered a cost of living crisis. Consumer inflation peaked near 35% last December before falling after the Statistics Office revised its base year and adjusted the weight of items in the price basket. The BBC has revealed that dozens of workers at a US-owned factory in Wales were exposed to toxic chemicals in firefighting foam over several decades. The American manufacturer 3M failed to tell workers at the Swansea plant that the foam contained two potentially carcinogenic forever chemicals. The BBC's Esme Stollard has more details.
3M's Swansea factory opened in 1952 and at its peak employed more than 1,000 people to manufacture nappy fastings and videotape. But some workers were also paid to be the site's firefighters and regularly used aqueous firefighting foam. The BBC has found that this foam contained PFOS and PFOA, two toxic forever chemicals. 3M knew of potential health risks of these chemicals as early as the 1970s, company documents show, but never warned workers. The factory shut 2 years ago, and 3M told the BBC that the health and safety of its employees and its communities are critical priorities.
$1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 451, in Botswana 13 pula 51, Kenya the dollar is 128 shilling 40, Zambia 23 kwacha 01. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 42, in Russia 80 rubles 2, India 90 rupee 53, in China 71.5, South Africa 16 rand 87 cents, $1 is 75 pence to the British pound, 85 to the euro. Commodities: gold is trading at $4,344, platinum at $1,744 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil at $61.39 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Coming up on Rise and Shine, we speak about a project between South Africa and Lesotho. The government of South Africa having reviewed progress on phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, a story we heard earlier from Chanduko Ligege with the economics update there. So we'll be joined by a department spokesperson to find out how far that has gone and progress made there by the Minister of Water and Sanitation in South Africa, Pemi Majodina.
Siyabangena manje. Vito iJabulani Kolele iMagoda. Jabulani is a young man from Giyani in Limpopo in South Africa. Very easy guy, taking things easy. To know me is to know that I love what I do, which I'm crazy about it. So when you hear me on radio, expect the best. Expect great music. Expect great content. Expect 180 minutes of nothing but fun. You'll find me on the morning reset, 3 to 6 a.m., Monday to Friday. Siyabangena baba. Ay. Mbuleke.
From Cape to Cairo, Dakar to Dar es Salaam, Rise and Shine with Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda on Channel Africa.
South Africa's presidency has welcomed what it's described as encouraging economic gains as the year draws to a close, citing a stronger rand, modest economic growth, and an improvement in employment figures. Now, briefing the media, the presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya said that the currency has strengthened against major competitors, including the US dollar. The British pound expanded by 0.5% in the third quarter, and unemployment declined to 31.9%, with the construction sector leading in job creation. Channel Africa reporter Michael Mbewe picks up the story for us.
South Africa's presidency convened a media briefing to provide an update on the presidential program and to engage the public on key topical issues of national interest. The briefing formed part of ongoing efforts to promote transparency, outline progress on government priorities, and respond to matters shaping the country's social and economic discourse. In his address, presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya highlighted the significant gains recorded by South Africa's currency, the rand. The rand is holding its own against major currencies and has breached the level of 17 rands to the US dollar. GDP grew by 0.5% in the third quarter, meaning that the economy is expanding. Much remains in the pipeline to achieve higher growth rate. Its centrality is to attain the country's developmental aspirations. Unemployment for quarter 3 was down by 1.3 percentage points to 31.9%, with the construction sector the major contributor, with 130,000 new jobs out of a total of 248,000 new jobs. He stated that the government plans to invest about $60 billion in infrastructure projects over the next 3 years. Government will spend R1 trillion over the next 3 years on infrastructure projects. Stability of energy supply is central to this turnaround, and we should be building on the successes thus far to the next level, as we are doing. This year, the Youth Employment Service reached the milestone of 200,000 young South Africans funded and placed into quality first job experiences. Magwenya added that international confidence has improved citing South Africa's first sovereign rating upgrade in 2 decades by Standard & Poor's, alongside the International Monetary Fund raising the country's growth outlook for 2025 and 2026.
South Africa achieved its first rating upgrade in 20 years when the ratings agency Standard & Poor upgraded the country's foreign currency long-term sovereign credit rating to BB from BB minus. In addition, the local currency long-term sovereign credit rating was adjusted to BB plus from BB. The International Monetary Fund lifted its growth forecast for the country to 1.3% in 2025 and 1.4% in 2026. This is from 1.1% and 1.2% respectively.
He attributed the improvement to policy direction outlined in the 2025 State of the Nation address, noting that the Government of National Unity has adopted the Medium-Term Development Plan for 2024 to 2029, anchored on inclusive growth and job creation, poverty reduction and cost of living relief, and the building of state capacity.
You could rightly ask, what is the yardstick we should use for government in this regard? And that's quite easy. The document to start is the State of the Nation address, and in this instance, it is the SONA 2025 that was delivered by President Ramaphosa in February of this year. In his address, the President announced that the Government of National Unity has adopted the Medium-Term Development Plan for the period 2024-2029, the MTDP, which sets out 3 key priorities of government. These priorities are to drive inclusive growth and job creation, to reduce poverty, and to tackle the high cost of living, and lastly, to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state.
Michael Mbewe, Channel Africa News, Johannesburg.
Cheers to rest and renewal. Festive African greetings from Channel Africa. Go on, download the Channel Africa app.
South Africa's Water and Sanitation Minister, Phemi Majodina, has wrapped up an oversight visit to Lesotho, where government reviewed progress on Phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. While nearly half of the Bodiadi transfer tunnel has been completed, the minister has warned that no further delays beyond the 2028-2029 deadline will be tolerated. For more on the visit, we're joined by the department spokesperson, Wisani Mavasa. Wisani, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to you and your listeners.
So the minister says 48% of the Bodiadi transfer tunnel is complete. What does that figure actually represent on the ground, and how confident is the department that the remaining work can be finished by 2028-2029?
Thank you once again. The Minister of Water and Sanitation, as a partner in this Lesotho Highland Water Project, together with the counterpart, Minister took a decision sometime earlier in the year that they need to get themselves fully involved in terms of ensuring that they conduct regular oversight to the project so as to ensure that it moves. And the reason being is that this project, as you are aware, it had been delayed previously over a period of time. So when it was resuscitated back in 2023, if you recall, the president was here meeting with the head of state, King Leon III, in April in 2023 to actually turn the sword for the commencement of the construction of the Kudihadi Dam together with the associated infrastructure, which is the tunnel, as well as the bridges that are supposed to assist in terms of connecting roads and the other infrastructure. The department was started ensuring that at all times it gets updates in terms of the progress of the report through our chief delegate, who is a member of the commission, which is representing the 2 countries, so it to ensure that we continuously get updates in terms of the progress of the work. However, there were some concerns when the minister was here previously in terms of the speed at which this project is taking, and this was expressed by both ministers, and they took a decision that because we want to make sure that there are no more delays, And if there are delays, there are reasonable delays that may have been beyond the control of those that are implementing, which is the Lesotho Highland Development Authority, which is the implementing agent on behalf of the Commission, then that will be understandable. However, they need to ensure that at all times they ensure that the project is implemented and there is an acceleration plan in areas which were lagging behind due to some of the challenges such as weather conditions, such as equipment required in some areas. But I can plainly say to you right now that the ministers yesterday expressed satisfaction in terms of the progress that has been made. I can say to you that when it comes to the construction of the dam wall, it's sitting at around 40%, and the transfer tunnel, which is supposed to be the 8-kilometer transfer tunnel, which is supposed to transfer water from the Beda Dam down to Gatsi, is actually also sitting at 48%. And the tunnel itself, there were initially delays because of the equipment that is being used, because it had to be manufactured, it had to be assembled, and before it could be put on site and start working. And the team had indicated to the ministers that they actually were expecting to bring that machine to start drilling the tunnel on the other side of Beda, because it has started on the side of Gatsi. But they were able to do so. It was supposed to happen in February, early in the year, but they were able to do so now. When we arrived and went to site, that machine was already doing the work and it was already advancing in terms of that. So that on its own can indicate that there is serious commitment from the project implementers. When it comes to the resettlement sites, the LHDA, which is the implementing agent, has indicated that they are now at about 45% in terms of resettling all those that have been affected by the employment of the dam and the other areas that they needed to be relocated from. The compensation aspect, as well as ensuring that new homes are being built. As I'm speaking to you, the project leaders have completed about 24 houses, and the families have moved into those houses. Those that needed to be resettled, the process is to be compensated. The process is underway. About 105 houses are currently being constructed. You must understand that the dam will be, the inundation will start around 2028-29, but they have started already building those houses to ensure that by that time when the dam starts filling with water, all those families have been moved to a much more safer areas. They've been allocated the land which they need to ensure that they continue the subsistence farming, those that will do subsistence farming, the agricultural aspect, as well as the livestock that they look after. So the east in that, and the bridge, the Central Bridge, which is one of the major highlights for our visit, is sitting at 93%. We visited that bridge, and it's in a sense technically looking complete. Those are some touch-ups, and they are looking at having the bridge opened officially.
So that touches then on some of those concrete steps that you've put in place as the department to make sure that there are no further extensions, as you mentioned earlier, that the word delays. So that answers that. But this next point then I want to get us to, before we run out of time, communities near the project have raised complaints about access to water and compensation. So what outstanding issues remain there, and when will they be resolved?
Yes, indeed. There were some allegations regarding the issues of compensation and the settlement, as well as access roads. As in line with the treaty by the two countries and the implementing agent responsibility, they have assured the public, the affected communities, and the two ministers that the development partners in this project are ensuring that all means that all the necessary processes to ensure that they relocate people, but also they compensate them, as well as the roads that they need to redirect these communities to utilize now that these structures that are being constructed. They are involved. As I can speak to you, there are new major roads that have been built, but there are also new connecting roads that are enabling different communities to move around, which we have as part of this visit. say. And Minister, yes, indeed raised concern to say that you need to ensure that these families are receiving counseling in terms of these processes, because you can imagine someone being moved out of your home and be told that you have to go start life somewhere else. And the implementing agent has assured the principal that indeed that process is underway. When it comes to the delays, you spoke about the delays earlier. As I've indicated, the principals received reports, and they've been assured that quarterly they will be receiving an update report in terms of the progress of this project, and where there are delays, there must be an acceleration plan that is implemented or that is presented to them that indicates that they are going to catch up on that time, so that there is no more funds that must be injected as a result of delays, as a result of some of this project not moving due to project planning or poor project planning, or even the implementers or the contractors on the ground.
Given the multi-billion rand cost of phase 2, how is the department ensuring that there'll be transparency and accountability in terms of expenditure? The implementing agent, the LHDA, regularly provides financial reports to the Commission on behalf of the two countries to ensure that we are aware in terms of the expenditure of the amount that has been set aside for this particular project. As I can speak to you right now, when we look at what has been done on the ground versus the money that has been spent, the balance, 21 billion has been spent on this project, which is currently sitting at about 48% in terms of the progress versus the allocated budget. You can see that they are moving and they are aligned with what is currently available, and that has been set aside for the project. Sani, thank you so much again for your time. We appreciate you updating us.
Thank you, Sani.
Wisani Mavasa is the Department of Water and Sanitation spokesperson, giving us the latest in terms of a project there between South Africa and Lesotho, where the government of South Africa travelled to the country to review progress on phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. This being called the Bodihadi Transfer Tunnel, and parts of that having been completed. And then she brought us up to speed in terms of previous delays and how those have been dealt with to ensure that there are no further extensions, as the Minister does not want any further delays.
Keep Africa in your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. channelafrica.co.za.
Coming up next, it's the news with Onelen Sinsi. It's a very good morning from me, Peter Ndoro, and Asanda Beda.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. The Congolese ex-rebel leader, Roger Lumbala, has been found guilty by Paris court of complicity in crimes against humanity committed during the Second Congo War and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The trial has been hailed by international justice advocates as a milestone in expanding accountability for the conflict that left millions dead. Prosecutors had sought a life sentence for the 67-year-old Lumbala. The allegations concerned a military operation known as Erasing the Board, carried out in 2002 and 2003 in northeastern Congo, led at the time by Lumbala. The Global Refugee Forum Progress Review kicked off yesterday in Geneva, Switzerland. It is co-hosted by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees together with the Swiss government. The forum, which runs till the 17th of December, brings together senior government officials, civil society and private sector, academia, faith leaders and most importantly refugees to advance new solutions and to assess how pledges made over the past years are being translated into real impact. UN High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grande explains.
A year when refugees were frequently vilified, with their suffering cynically used by traffickers for profit, and their situation by politicians to gain votes for the next election. A year of repeated attacks on the 1951 Refugee Convention and on the very institution of asylum. when the sudden, drastic, irresponsible and short-sighted collapse of foreign assistance continues to devastate the aid sector.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa will today deliver a keynote address at the National Commemoration of Reconciliation Day at the Ncome Museum at the Umzinyathi district in the KwaZulu-Natal province. The Day of Reconciliation is a South African public holiday established in 1995 to foster national unity following apartheid. The date was chosen because it held significance for both the Afrikaner and South African liberation history. It marks the Afrikaner Day of the Vow and the founding of the ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto weSizwe. The holiday serves to acknowledge this shared thought conflicting past and promote reconciliation and forgiveness. South Africa's Home Affairs Minister, Dr. Leon Schreiber, says none of the 153 Palestinian travelers that landed at the OR Tambo International Airport last month requested asylum in the country. Al-Jamaa IAH MP Imran Ismail Musa asked Schreiber about his intervention, and he responded in a written parliamentary reply. On the 13th of last month, 153 Palestinians landed in Johannesburg. Only 23 of them had the required documentation and confirmed accommodation as the Immigration Act stipulates. The rest could initially not be processed. Schreiber says he had engaged with the Border Management Authority on admitting the passengers on humanitarian grounds under the care of Gift of the Givers. Lastly, U.S. President Donald Trump has filed a defamation suit against the BBC, accusing the British Broadcasting Corporation of producing a deceptive portrayal of a paranormal documentary. The lawsuit, requesting at least $5 billion in damages, was filed in federal court in the U.S. state of Florida yesterday. The suit takes aim at an episode of the BBC's flagship program, which spliced together clips from Trump's January 6, 2021 speech in Washington, D.C., before his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. They had sought to prevent the certification of Joe Biden's election win after the November 2020 election. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us at +27 11 714 4459. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Tsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, Bafana Bafana captain is concerned about the mood in the camp ahead of their departure to Morocco. Al Ahly SC has been crowned 2025 basketball champions as APR claim bronze. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
From Africa's broadcast capital to the furthest corners of the globe, this is Rise and Shine, every weekday mornings on Channel Africa.
In the next 30 minutes, right here on Channel Africa's Rise and Shine. By the way, I'm Peter Ndoro. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us for this, the third and final hour of the program today on this Tuesday. I'm going to be exploring something called press freedom. There are reports that press safety is sadly on the decline, and that there are some people that are deliberately targeting journalists. We get to the bottom of that with the CPJ.
And good morning, I'm Asanda Beda. On www.channelafrica.co.za is where you can connect with us. Another story we'll be looking at is the UN, or former UN chief and elder emeritus Ban Ki-moon, who addressed the UN Security Council in an open debate. And this debate was focused on the role and qualities of the next Secretary General. We'll take some key takeaways from that and bring them to you.
Parlez-vous couramment le français? Êtes-vous passionné par la radio? Et êtes-vous qualifié pour travailler en Afrique du Sud? Envoyez-nous votre CV et vos 3 minutes démo en MP3 à @channelafrica.co.za pour avoir une chance de rejoindre la famille Channel Africa. Si vous n'avez pas de réponse après 14 jours, cela signifie que vous n'avez pas été retenu. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
Journalist safety has emerged as a major global concern in 2025, with conflict zones becoming increasingly deadly for media workers. Gaza has been identified as the world's most dangerous place for journalists, while Sudan remains the deadliest country for reporters in Africa for the second year running. Now, press freedom groups have warned that journalists are being deliberately targeted and detained and killed, often with little accountability. To discuss the growing dangers facing journalists, particularly in Africa, we're now joined by Mutoki Mumo, Africa Program Coordinator at the Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I have to apologize to your viewers to begin with because my power is blinking just a little bit, but I think you can still see me. This is a problem we share in Africa, unfortunately, of infrastructure issues.
Yes,
thank you so much for having me.
As long as we can hear you, that's all that matters in the end.
Okay, thank you so much. So, as you've rightly pointed out, 2025 is a year when I would characterize press freedom in Africa, and I believe beyond Africa, is continuing to face persistent challenges, but also new threats amid a broader retreat or a broader threat against democracy, but also amid new conflict, persistent conflict in various corners of the world. So we see all of this conspiring to make the globe, but Africa especially, which is where I primarily carry out my research and advocacy, an increasingly unsafe place for journalists who face various types of threats and who are subject to various forms of censorship.
We'll talk about the kinds of threats and harm that they're experiencing, but let's try and get a sense of the state of affairs across the continent. There are sadly the usual suspects, countries that we know have been problematic for some time. Is this problem increasing across other countries that perhaps weren't on the radar before? Or is it just that the countries that have been a problem are just increasing their activity, or is it both?
So I'm usually a bit hesitant to quantify increasing versus decreasing, but I can broadly say that as someone who does this type of work, who does research and advocacy and keeps an eye on press freedom, I am definitely worrying about a wider group of countries. Let me explain what I mean. When we do our research about imprisoned journalists, as you rightly noted, we typically have the countries that are repeated offenders. And for instance, here we see countries like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Rwanda, Cameroon that frequently rank amongst the worst jailers of journalists in Africa. And while this has remained largely unchanged, we're finding ourselves having to contend with new types of restrictions and concerns in other places. I'll use an example of Zambia. For a while after the election of Hakainde Hichilema, there was this hope that things would be different, that things would change. But we've just seen over this past year, Zambia really trying to tighten the legislative legislative restrictions around journalists, passing perhaps some of the most restrictive cybercrime laws in Africa, cybersecurity and cybercrime law. If we look at even South Africa, for instance, considered a beacon, considered a model for other countries in the Southern Africa region and beyond, but a country where earlier this year we were documenting the repeated attempts to censor journalists through the use of gag orders. And even in countries where we've had historical concerns, and I'm using here Somalia as an example, where for a long time we've said this is one of the most dangerous places to be a journalist in Africa. 2025 has been frankly just quite shocking in the level of aggression against the press. We've seen local press freedom groups documenting, around I would say at least 100 journalists arrested in and out of jail in Somalia this year. So this is for brief periods of a few hours, a few days, some going to several weeks. But even though those arrests are, brief relative to what we see in other countries like Ethiopia and Eritrea, they can still have an impact. So to summarize all of this, yes, usual suspects. Things are not getting better. In fact, in many places, they're getting worse. But then at the same time, we're seeing countries where we thought, okay, this might be a relatively safe space for journalists, becoming a place where journalists are not so sure of their place. And one last example to give here is my home country, Kenya, which I must call out. Because for years, for decades, Kenya has been perceived as a haven for journalists in exile. But what we've seen increasingly is that domestic journalists can expect physical attacks, can expect censorship, particularly on their coverage around protests, but also journalists who are here, either foreign journalists or journalists in exile, are not as assured that they would not be targeted by their home countries, that they'll not be targeted by transnational repression or for transnational repression. So broadly, I would say this is the picture in our region.
You use the word target, and that means deliberate action against a particular group of people, this being journalists. Are we saying that journalists are being targeted specifically and not caught in the crossfire, as it were?
So this is a really interesting question, actually, and one that we confront each and every day as we do the work that we do. And I'll say CPJ does not, we advocate for journalists persecuted in connection to journalism. Now, this can mean two things. It can mean that they've been deliberately targeted because they are a journalist and they're doing a specific piece of reporting that someone is not happy with. And by targeted here, I'm using this word very broadly. It could be targeted for arrest, targeted for physical assault, targeted for killing, which is the ultimate act of silencing. Now, when you say crossfire, for me, this word is one that we specifically talk about when we're looking at journalists in the context of covering conflict, and perhaps to some extent covering civil unrest. And in those circumstances, we do recognize that a journalist embedded maybe with a military force might get caught in the crossfire. But this does not, or a journalist who's a civilian might also get caught in the crossfire. But I want to make something clear. This does not, even if there's a case where we say, okay, this person was caught up in crossfire as opposed to being deliberately targeted, this does not absolve state actors and others of responsibility to investigate, to find out actually what happened. Because if we talk about conflict specifically, journalists are civilians and they're owed the same type of protections as any other civilians. And if a civilian is being killed in the context of conflict, then that needs to be investigated. But coming back to your question, are journalists being targeted? The short answer is yes. If we look at various parts of our continent, we see time and time again journalists, whether that's covering protest or in other contexts, readily identifying themselves as journalists or readily visible as journalists, but still being or facing aggression, whether that's the form of physical assaults, whether that's the form of arrest, and sometimes even facing that precisely because they identified themselves, precisely because they said, I'm a reporter and I'm doing this thing.
One hears disturbing stories like what happened to Agatha Ataure, a Ugandan journalist, and Mwangi from Kenya, that they were in another country when they were targeted and abused. Are you seeing more and more cross-border abuses? It's one thing when authorities target citizens in their own country, but when you go as a visitor and you get targeted because of your journalism, that's another level of risk, I guess, for journalists.
So there are two elements of this. There's the element of being a foreign journalist, essentially, and being targeted while being a foreign journalist. And that's what Agatha and Boniface were subjected to. They went to Tanzania to observe the case against opposition leader Tundu Lissu, and they were essentially abducted by the state and later tortured in the context of that. And that, for me, points to a broader hostility that we're seeing against foreign reporting in this region, and I think even beyond. Where, coming back to Tanzania, we recently published a report about the elections that just concluded there that were followed by incredible violence. And one of the things that we heard from journalists is that they were not even allowed to go, that the foreign journalists were blocked from access. And if we look across the region, in East Africa and beyond, we're seeing this type of hostility towards the foreign press. Then there's the other element of transnational repression, which is a rising concern, particularly in the corner of the world where I live in East Africa. And this is when state actors reach across borders to threaten to undermine the safety of dissidents who've left home, of critics who've left home, of journalists who've left home. And this can manifest in a couple of ways. Unfortunately, over the last 2 to 3 years, we as a program have documented physical violence against journalists in exile. The one that comes to mind is of a Tanzanian journalist in Kenya, Maria Sarungi Tsahai, who was abducted at the beginning of this year in a suspected case of transnational repression, or the Pakistani journalist Ashad Sharif, who was killed several years ago, assassinated by Kenyan police, again in another case that should be investigated and has the hallmarks of transnational repression. So, and these are just the examples that we know of, or the examples that the evidence is quite clear. There's many other cases where people are threatened or where they're subjected to attacks via technology, whether that's spyware attacks or online harassment. And what you're seeing again is a willingness to breach international borders in the pursuit of critics, in the pursuit of silencing critics. So you see these two things happening. A foreign journalist facing hostility when they try to cross borders to report journalism, but then also those who flee their homes facing risks. And there's a question, what level of coordination is there between these states? We sometimes joke here, or not really joke because it's quite sad, that the East African community can seem like a little club of authoritarian actors trying to protect each other and trying to scratch each other's backs. And when you see acts like this, Boniface Mwangi and Agatha being abducted in Tanzania, when you see South Sudanese critics being refouled to South Sudan, or when you see attacks on journalists in Kenya, and you see the governments not responding the way they ought to, with outrage, with investigation, with demands for credible inquiries. You have to ask yourself, how much are they actually coordinating to do this? How much of these attacks on journalists and critics are, in an effort to essentially scratch each other's backs?
Mutoki, we've run out of time, but thank you so much indeed for talking to us about this very, very important issue. And as you said right at the beginning, that our very democracy is dependent on making sure journalism is allowed to happen freely. But thank you so much indeed for giving us a sense of the seriousness and the concern across the continent. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Mutoki Mumo, Africa Program Coordinator at the Committee to Protect Journalists, speaking to us about the growing dangers facing journalists across the continent and around the world.
Channel Africa is evolving, and so are you. Stay connected wherever you are with our brand new website and mobile app. Stream your favorite shows, catch up on African news, culture, and conversations, all at your fingertips.
Africa is just a tap away.
Your world, your stories, now on the go.
Stay connected wherever you are.
visit channelafrica.co.za or download the Channel Africa app today. Channel Africa, the African perspective. From Cape to Cairo, Dakar to Dar es Salaam, rise and shine with Peter Ndoro and Asanda Beda on Channel Africa.
The next UN Secretary General should be elected to a single 7-year term that would limit their dependence on the Security Council's permanent members for an extension. That's the view of former UN Chief and Elder Emeritus Ban Ki-moon, who addressed the UN Security Council in an open debate focused on the role and qualities of the next Secretary General. The process to select the next UNSG formally kicked off in late November as member states were asked to nominate candidates that would succeed incumbent Antonio Guterres, whose term ends in December 31st next year. Sherwin Bryce Peace has more.
As the United Nations embarks on its search for Guterres' replacement, words of advice from a former Secretary General. Listen to Elder Emeritus Ban Ki-moon.
Let me avail myself of this opportunity to make humble suggestions based on my 10 years of experience at the United Nations. The next Secretary General should be empowered by a single 7-year term. Two 5-year terms leave the Secretary General overly dependent on this Council's permanent members for an extension. This is a convention, not a charter requirement, and the General Assembly holds the power to set the terms of the appointment itself.
The Council will formally recommend a candidate to the 193-member General Assembly, giving the 5 permanent and veto-wielding members, China, France, Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom, an outsized role in first agreeing on a candidate that can then be presented to the wider membership.
I am of the view that UN leadership must more confidently reassert its active political role in diplomacy for peace, including mediating and settling crises. Member states must support this role and guard against situations in which only powerful countries dictate political settlements. And this needs to start here in this Council and this chamber. Even though I did not agree that Secretary General of the United Nations were often called secular popes, they had moral authority. But they also have to hold actual power in order to mediate between 2 conflicting parties and to more actively intervene in cases of serious breaches of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, such as atrocity crimes.
The Council also heard from academic and political scientist Professor Anjali K. Dayal of Fordham University, who framed the next UN leader as someone that must operate in a divided yet interconnected world.
In that context, it becomes even more important to find a Secretary General who knows their explicit charge is to weigh future human dignity and flourishing more heavily than the narrower interests that necessarily occupy national leaders. Now, there's not much material power in the office of the Secretary General. There's not much funding and not much formal authority, especially compared to member states. But what the office has, as we just heard, right, is the power of ideas and narrative, a unique, universal moral authority to argue for peace, security, and the common good of people, and the ability to mobilize the international civil service towards the goals that member states set for it. Even in past periods of great division, this council has managed to select a candidate who can advance the cause of peace.
Publicly declared and officially nominated candidates include former Chilean President and UN official Michelle Bachelet, the current Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency Rafael Grossi, former Costa Rican Vice President and current Secretary General of the UN Conference on Trade and Development Rebecca Greenspan, and former Bolivian Vice President David Choquehuanca.
And so perhaps the single most important characteristic for any Secretary General you wish to select is someone who, both by disposition and by position, weighs the value of tomorrow more than they weigh today's advantages, and who recognizes their charge as being the charge of humanity, and who knows their power lies in helping us tie our ambitions today towards future flourishing, to making the conference room always more attractive than the battlefield.
For more than 80 years, the UN Secretary-General has never been a woman, and based on the informal tradition of rotating the SG's geographic origin, the current cycle favors a candidate from Latin America and the Caribbean. And while there is immense pressure from a large number of member states for the top job to be secured by a woman, the United States and Russia are among those countries that have emphasized their preference for a merit-based selection process from all regions of the world. The next UN leader should be known within the next 6 to 8 months. I'm Sherwin Bryce-Pease in New York.
A fresh morning, a fresh perspective. Stay tuned to Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
So that was a fascinating story. And I have to say, Asanda, you and I have got one of the best jobs in the world because we get to travel and we get to meet some very interesting people. And I have to say, I was so privileged to have met Ban Ki-moon himself at
When
the
did you
United
meet?
Nations.
Okay.
It was actually towards the end of his tenure.
Mm.
And in the room were global leaders, presidents, and there was little Peter Ndoro, all the way from South Africa, bringing him into the room for this summit. And there were a few actors in there. Leonardo DiCaprio was sitting in the table with Ban Ki-moon because he's one of his ambassadors. But I also had a chance. He wasn't UN Secretary General at the time. He had come out of office. Kofi Annan.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a fascinating person to chat to. And sadly, the Rwanda genocide thing will always be one of his deepest regrets, because they should have acted much sooner had they called a thing a thing.
So was that your conversation with Kofi Annan?
Well, it's not something that he talks about easily.
Uh-huh.
And he's, you're almost
As you can
warned
imagine.
not to go there.
Yeah.
So I didn't talk to him about it. But over time, you start to see, he starts to open up in various conversations because they didn't call it a genocide early enough. Because had they done that, the UN system would have been forced to take action. And
Right.
it happened too slowly.
I guess Leonardo DiCaprio being there as well, we see him as an actor, but he's quite big on environmentalism.
Yeah.
So he's a leader in his own right there. We do have the
Indeed.
best job. We really do.
Talking
8:30?
yeah.
Yeah, it is. Let's get our news headlines. And here's Onel Nsinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Election campaigning has officially begun in the Central African Republic ahead of the presidential vote that's scheduled for the 28th of December. The Global Refugee Forum Progressive Review kicked off yesterday in Geneva, Switzerland. It is co-hosted by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees together with the Swiss government. And US President Donald Trump has filed a defamation suit against the BBC, accusing the British Broadcasting Corporation of producing a deceptive portrayal in the Panorama documentary. Channel Africa News, I'm Onel Nsinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Right, it's time now for a final look at what's been happening in the world of sport on Rise and Shine. And we say good morning once again to Figile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Morning again, Peter. We start off with football news after last week's drama following utterances by Bafana Bafana coach Hugo Broos. Not all seems well in the South African camp. And with just days before their departure for the Africa Cup of Nations tournament in Morocco, it's a cause for concern for Captain Ronan Williams. But he's confident that the mood and the spirit in the camp will improve once they've worked through the issues plaguing the team and the squad is at full strength. And questions regarding the coach's utterances last week were not entertained. The utterance aimed at Orlando Pirates defender Mbegezeli Mbogazi and his agent Basia Michaels were regarded racist and sexist. Bafana Bafana captain Ronwin Williams.
We had our own small little problems as a team, but I'm glad those things happened, especially inside the team going into the major tournament now. We had a chance to sit together, sort things out, try and fix the issues that we have as a team, and training has been good, but we haven't been at our best as well. So I think once the team settles down this week, I think things will be better, because I had a strange feeling this week that the mood in the team hasn't been the best. But we'll sort it out and we'll keep fighting.
Broos was allowed to read a statement to lay the matter to rest. He said he was angry because he believed those closest to Mbogazi did not have his best interests at heart, but he never meant for his comments to come across as racist or sexist.
I agree that my choice of words was not the right one, and I want to apologize for that. But I never wanted to make a racist or sexist comment. I'm neither a racist or a sexist.
Nigeria Football Federation NFF President Ibrahim Gusau has publicly dismissed claims that the federation influenced head coach Eric Chele's final squad selection for the upcoming Africa Cup of Nations. Chele recently narrowed his provisional 54-man list down to 28 players, a decision that sparked criticism and accusations that high-ranking NFF officials had pushed for the inclusion of certain individuals. In an interview, Gusau cautioned against such rumors. Gusau urged the public to be wary of unfounded allegations, particularly those circulating on social media, and reaffirmed his commitment to allowing the coaching staff and their independence in sporting decisions. Now, volleyball. It's Rwanda's men parliamentary volleyball team outshone their Ugandan counterparts, securing a 3-1 victory in an entertaining encounter played at Lugogo Indoor Stadium as the 15th Inter-Parliamentary Games drew to a close. The games will officially conclude today following a football match between the parliaments of Uganda and Kenya at Philip Omondi Stadium. Let's end with boxing news. Anthony Joshua says his career needed a reset as he prepares for a surprise showdown with YouTube star Jake Paul in Miami this weekend. Joshua has not fought since suffering a knockout defeat to Daniel Dubois in September 2024 and was linked with several big-name opponents before agreeing to face Paul. The bout takes place on Friday evening, local time, early Saturday morning in South Africa, with Joshua releasing a video on YouTube channel reflecting on the recent weeks and his return to the ring. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fidel Nwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Still to come on Rise and Shine, we talk the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, or IFRC. They've recently released their global plan for 2026, which is around humanitarian aid. They aim to put more resources and decision-making closer to local communities when it comes to humanitarian needs. We'll have that chat coming up. And of course, you're still with Rise and Shine.
The sound of Africa is evolving. Experience our new mobile app. Free to download, free to connect.
Let's find out what's happening in the world of business. Here's Chandugo Ligege with our economics news.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. Good morning. South Africa's Electricity and Energy Minister, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, says he's hopeful that local companies will qualify in their bids in the next phases of the Independent Transmission Procurement Project. Ramokgopa has named 7 international companies as pre-qualified bidders under the first phase of the project. The finalists from the list will help in the construction of a 14,000-kilometer power transmission line as part of the country's public-private partnership. The project is estimated to cost $26 billion over 10 years. Ramokgopa explains.
We are happy that of the 17 that responded, we have 7 that are successful. So those are Adani Power, Middle East Limited, of course the lead member there. So there's someone who brings these impeccable credentials to the fore to be examined and scrutinized in this consortium is Adani Power, Middle East.
South Africa's presidency has welcomed what it describes as encouraging economic gains. The year draws to a close, citing a stronger rand, modest economic growth, and an improvement in employment. Briefing the media, presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya said the currency has strengthened against major competitors.
Government will spend R1 trillion over the next 3 years on infrastructure projects. Stability of energy supply is central to this turnaround, and we should be building on the successes thus far to the next level as we are doing. This year, the Youth Employment Service reached the milestone of 200,000 young South Africans funded and placed into quality first job experiences.
Uganda is planning to borrow $608 million from lenders such as the Korea Export-Import Bank and South Africa's Rand Merchant Bank, RMB, to finance infrastructure development. The country's ballooning public debt has triggered concern among opposition politicians, analysts and the central bank, which has warned that high debt servicing costs are diverting resources from essential social services. A document from the Ugandan parliament shows that of the total credit the country plans to source $448 million from RMB and the rest from Korea Export-Import Bank. Data from LSEG and DBX Commodities show that South African miners are boosting thermal coal exports to Israel after top supplier Colombia ordered a total ban on shipments of the power generation fuel to Israel. Colombia and South Africa are among Israel's critics, with the South American nation's presidential decree enacting the export ban after accusing Israel of killing tens of thousands in Gaza, including children. South Africa has accused Israel of genocide at the International Court of Justice. Colombian coal exports to Israel dropped to zero in the 3 months ended November after Colombia doubled down on an earlier ban and blocked supplies under long-term deals. The BBC has revealed that dozens of workers at a US-owned factory in Wales were exposed to toxic chemicals in firefighting foam over several decades. The American manufacturer 3M failed to tell workers at the Swansea plant that the foam contained 2 potentially carcinogenic forever chemicals. The BBC's Esme Stollard has more details.
3M's Swansea factory opened in 1952 and at its peak employed more than 1,000 people to manufacture nappy fastings and videotape. But workers were also paid to be the site's firefighters and regularly used aqueous firefighting foam. The BBC has found that this foam contained PFOS and PFOA, 2 toxic forever chemicals. 3M knew of potential health risks of these chemicals as early as the 1970s, company documents show, but never warned workers. The factory shut 2 years ago, and 3M told the BBC that the health and safety of its employees and its communities are critical priorities.
$1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 451, in Botswana 13 pula 51. Kenya the dollar is 128 shilling 40, Zambia 23 kwacha 1. BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is at 5 real 42, in Russia 80 rubles 2, India 90 rupee 53, China 71.5, South Africa 16 rand 87 cents. $1 is 75 pence to the British pound, 85 to the euro. Commodities, gold is at 4,300 $344, platinum at $1,744 per ounce, the price of Brent crude oil at $61.39 a barrel. That's all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Ukatili wa lakini hauwezi kuendelea. Ukiona, ongea. Ikiwa unaumia, funguka, kwa sababu kutofanya lolote sio chaguo. Sikiliza vituo vyote 19 vya redio kuanzia Jumatano ya tarehe 23 Julai kwenye mijadala, ushauri, tamthilia, maonyesho ya elimu na mahojiano na wataalamu, manusura, watunga sheria na nchi nzima iliyoathirika na ukatili wa kijinsia kwenye vituo vyako pendwa vya redio. Piga simu 0800 428 428 ili kuripoti unyanyasaji au kupata msaada. GBV ikomeshwe na wewe. Ujumbe huu umeletwa kwenu na shirika la SABC.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Humanitarian needs are rising around the world, from climate disasters to protracted conflicts, while funding for aid continues to shrink. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies has recently released its global plan for 2026, aiming to put more resources and decision-making closer to local communities. Joining us now live is Scott Craig, spokesperson for the IFRC, or the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, to explain what this plan means for people most at risk. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Humanitarian needs are described as unprecedented in this IFRC's global plan. Can you give us a sense of what that looks like on the ground today?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for the interest in our work, because I think it's really important. I mean, the short answer to your question is what we have is a situation where humanitarian needs are growing and growing and growing to unprecedented levels. But as you said in the introduction, the amount of money that we have available across the whole humanitarian system is simply not enough to keep pace with that scale of needs. So what we're seeing is a lot more in the way of climate-related disasters, floods, hurricanes. As you've seen, on your channel, I know you've covered some of these things happening early in the year. We've had earthquakes taking place in places like Myanmar, Afghanistan. We've had the Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean. We have climate-related droughts taking place in Africa, which really don't make international headlines, I think, in the way that they should. In Kenya, for example, there's a really severe climate-related drought in the arid and semi-arid lands of the country, and also in Somalia, there's a drought as well. And so, we have a situation where the needs are growing to unprecedented levels, but the money available to combat those is shrinking. And so what we at the IFRC are appealing for is, as you say, 3.4 billion for our plan next year. But we want to make sure that we're not just doing business as usual. We have to make sure that money is really getting through to the local level, because we think that that is where money is most effectively spent. And so 75% of all the money that we mobilize internationally is going to be spent at the local level. And, the Red Cross and Red Crescent, our organizations around the world, are in kind of a unique position to be able to do that, because they're already in the local communities and they're often the first responding to these disasters.
So, as you say, 3.4 billion Swiss franc is part of the plan for 2026 that the IFRC is planning to gather. How do you plan to achieve that in this current funding climate? Because we do also touch on the fact that funding in humanitarian action is shrinking.
Yeah, and as our Secretary General said when launching the plan the other day, we're looking at a funding situation internationally which is extremely tight. There's no two ways about it. We've already seen a reduction in international donor spending on aid, and we may see further reductions in the future. I think the short answer to your question is, how do we ensure that we get the resources we need? We have to ensure that we are effective and that we are an effective partner that donors look to be able to invest because we achieve results on the ground. So first and foremost, we have to ensure that money that's invested in the IFRC, in the Red Cross and the Red Crescent is money from a donor perspective that's well spent. We think that we are very effective in spending money, and that our results speak for themselves in terms of the number of people that we're helping, the impact that we're having. But again, I come back to the earlier point that I was making, which is we have to ensure that we spend money as locally as possible. We like to say at the IFRC that we're as global as necessary, but primarily are spending money locally. So I think that's the thing. And the other thing is we have to also look as a humanitarian sector, we have to look beyond traditional funding. I mean, I think that the days of traditional donor funding being the only game in town, I think, are over. So increasingly, we're looking to the private sector to be partners in humanitarian action. But also, how do we look to private capital markets, blended finance, insurance-based systems? How do we diversify that range of funders to ensure that we have the money available to help people in need where they are?
And on that, as you call on donors, you want them to be or to support flexible, unearmarked funding. Why are these types of funds so critical to help communities in need?
I'm glad you raised that, money, because for people who are watching who don't necessarily may be familiar with the phrase, but don't necessarily know what it means. Unrestricted funding means when donors give money to the IFRC that they don't put restrictions or limitations on how that money should be spent, or they haven't earmarked it for specific purposes. So it goes into the general pot of money, which can then be allocated according to the different needs that occur over the course of the year. We think that those that unrestricted funding is important for any humanitarian organization, simply because it allows you to have the maximum amount of flexibility in responding to needs. As I said to you kind of at the outset of the program, one of the things that I personally find fascinating in this job is that the scale of the needs are what they are. I mean, it's off the charts. But within that, you're covering a huge diversity of challenges, from disasters to climate-related emergencies to health to food and nutrition. There is quite a range of components to any kind of humanitarian response. And so the more or the less restricted that funds can be, the more able that we are to apply them to a variety of purposes.
Thank you so much, Scott. We're going to leave it there for now, and we appreciate your time again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And I should say, for anybody listening as well, of course, there's much more information on our website, ifrc.org. You can also donate there as well. And for listeners and viewers in South Africa, of course, please go to the South African Red Cross website as well, where you find lots of information and ability to donate as well. And thank you so much for your time and for your interest in our work.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Scott Craig from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, speaking to us about their global plan for 2026.
The voice of the continent, now online, with all your sports fixtures, lifestyle, and more.
It's time to find out what's happening in the world of On the Move, coming up after the 9 o'clock news. And Miss Palliser is in the house to tell
Good
us.
morning.
Top of the morning to you. How are you today?
Very good. So, in the first hour of today's show, we're speaking about depression and anxiety. And it turns out that, suicide at this time of the year is on the rise. There's a number of factors, and we'll be unpacking those factors, the social, the emotional, and the psychological factors that make this time of the year particularly challenging. And we're going to be unpacking that, of course, raising awareness about mental health and depression and anxiety. We move on in the cubicle. People are taking time off work. It's time for people to relax and go home. But there is a certain kind of people who just don't know how to switch off. So even if it's holiday time, they keep checking their emails. They sort of have an anxiety or a fear that they can't let go of, and they're still logged in. So we're going to be unpacking, how do you actually log out? How do you face those challenges, face those fears that are related to work, and actually just have a good holiday?
Those are probably the people that are married to their work. That's all they do is about their work. They identify around what work is for them. That's how they come up with who they are as a person. And I know it's a bit of a challenge, like that one.
You know what some companies are doing now? Because they know that there are people like this, they disable your email. So that even if you try to get in, it locks you out for the entire time that you're... I remember when I was working at a broadcaster overseas, people had this thing they would work during lunch hour.
Yeah.
The editors in charge would force you to leave the building.
Okay.
So that you weren't working during your lunch hour.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just get caught up in these things.
Yeah, and it wasn't the time when you had your emails on your phone.
No. Well, yeah, exactly.
You need that break. So I think that's a good initiative by some of those companies that do that.
So that's what's coming up.
That's what we have for you today.
And happy Reconciliation Day, by the way.
Thank you, and to you guys as well.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 Central African Time on Channel Africa.
So let's talk about technology for a minute. There are strong views that Starlink could be closer to launching in South Africa following a directive by the Communications Minister, Solly Malatsi, to the telecoms regulator to review its local ownership rules. Malatsi issued the directive to the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA, last week, and it could pave the way for Elon Musk's SpaceX and other satellite internet companies to operate in South Africa without meeting the 30% local black ownership requirement. SABC News economics reporter Nosipho Khadebe has the story.
Malatsi has responded to the criticism, saying people aren't genuinely concerned about policy, but instead using outrage to slow down progress.
For some context, in May this year, we issued a policy directive that sought to harmonize regulations between both the provisions of the BBBE Act and also the regulations that were issued by the Independent Communications Authority in 2021, which resulted in a limitation that we believe should not have happened, where it limited the provisions to empowerment to only ownership. That process went through an open public process. We received over 19,000 submissions. Upon further interrogation of those submissions, 15,000 of them were substantive. The other were duplicate submissions.
Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies, Kusela Tiko, has called on ICASA to apply its mind on the minister's directive.
Now, what we are prepared to do as Parliament is that we're going to convene a meeting early in the year where we are going to appraise the committee of these developments and obviously ask the minister to brief us. As I said before, this is not the first time we are going to be doing it, but we're dealing with a minister who seems very intent on undermining Parliament, very intent on undermining the law. We have sought to understand whether a policy directive, which is of such huge import, he's even brought it before Cabinet for consideration. While it's not a requirement, we would think that something of this nature, which seeks to tamper with the laws of this country, he would have at least sought the wisdom of his collective. It seems that he has not done that here either.
Meanwhile, business writer for Business Day, Mudiwa Gavaza, says the approach by the minister may be legal, but it brings into question the original intention of empowerment rules by changing how transformation is achieved.
Companies in the sector that I look at, technology, media, and telecoms, we've seen that a lot of international technology companies have been using this. However, its use in telecommunications specifically is where the real angst is right now, because the empowerment has always focused on ownership in telecommunications. So it's almost a feeling at this point. That's where the opposition comes from. People feeling that the rules are being bent to accommodate Starlink, whose founder, Elon Musk, has said he's not going to, take on an ownership type of discussion. So, this is where we are. All of it, there is empowerment. However, the issue at hand is how do you deal with the conversation around ownership?
National African Farmers Union President Mutsipe Matlala acknowledges that smallholder farmers in South Africa do not have adequate access to the internet, but says relaxing policy to benefit certain individuals is not a good idea.
Because clearly our historical oppressive methods where black farmers were excluded to the markets, were excluded to own anything, including land. When anybody then come into South Africa just because he is somebody, then our law or our rules are relaxed. I think that is absolutely unfair. That is not really recognizing the plight of the previously oppressed people.
ICASA has yet to respond to the directive. Nosipo Khatebe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, today is the 16th of December, and we've been talking about the Day of Reconciliation, but it was also a significant day for the African National Congress, the oldest living political party on the continent. And after having abandoned decades of nonviolent resistance after the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, it launched its military wing, and it became known as Mkhonto weSizwe, or MK, and that's translated from Zulu to Spear of the Nation. And so the MK announced its existence by launching its first acts of sabotage, coordinating bomb blasts against government structures and infrastructure in major cities like Johannesburg and Durban and Port Elizabeth. And so this date, December the 16th, is marked as the start of the armed struggle against apartheid and became a rallying point for the anti-apartheid liberation movement, symbolizing armed resistance.
And that's how we say goodbye. As the Rise and Shine team will be back with you tomorrow, 6 till 9. From me, Asanda, Beda, and Peter Ndoro will join in then. Up next is On the Move with Benjamin Mushataba and Palisa Tau.
Download the SABC app and take Channel Africa with you everywhere you go.
Good morning. It is time for